He slammed the folder of papers onto the counter, so hard the coffee cups rattled. "You really thought I'd take you back?" Derek Holloway's voice cut through the quiet diner like a blade. He was dressed in the kind of suit that announced money before his mouth opened. His friends stood behind him, 3 of them, laughing like it was theater. "Look at you. Look at you. 7 years of my life wasted on a waitress." Tessa didn't move. Her hand stayed on the coffee pot. Derek's lip curled. He pulled out his phone, and before she could react, he snapped a photo of her apron-stained, hairpin back, standing behind a cracked counter, and held the screen up for his friends to see. "This is what settling looks like, gentlemen. Keep that in mind." The laughter that followed wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that every customer in that diner heard it, and not a single one said a word. What Derek Holloway didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the woman he just humiliated in front of a room full of strangers had, 9 months ago, married the most dangerous man in the city. And that man had a very long memory, and absolutely no tolerance for anyone who made his wife cry. If you've ever been the person everyone looked past, stay with me. Hit that subscribe button and drop your city in the comments. I want to know how far this story has traveled. Now let's go back to where it all began. The night Tessa Rowan stopped being afraid of anything started the way most turning points do: ugly, exhausting, and at an hour when no sane person should still be awake. 3:14 in the morning. She knew the exact time, because she'd been staring at the clock above the pie case for the last 20 minutes, doing the mental arithmetic she did every single night. Rent was due in 6 days. She had $412 in her checking account. The landlord had already left 2 voicemails she hadn't returned. After her shift ended at 6, she had a 4-block walk to a bus stop that was never on time, and then a 30-minute ride to an apartment where the radiator made sounds like a dying animal. This was her life. She wasn't ashamed of it, but she wasn't pretending it was easy either. Marlowe's all-night diner had been her employer for 7 years. It smelled like burnt grease and old coffee, and the particular kind of desperation that settles into a place when enough people come through it after midnight. The stools were duct-taped. The menu was laminated so many times the text was starting to blur. The heater behind the counter worked maybe 60% of the time, and this particular February night fell squarely in the 40%. Tessa wrapped her fingers around her mug of tea and watched the snow come sideways against the windows. She was not the type of woman people wrote poems about. She had dark circles she'd stopped trying to hide, hands that were rough from years of carrying plates and washing up, and a stubbornness that her mother had always described as her best and worst quality, sometimes in the same sentence. She was 30 years old. She felt 45. The bell above the door had been silent for 40 minutes. Then it wasn't. 3 men came through at once, and the cold air that followed them in was nothing compared to what they brought with them. The first 2 Tessa clocked immediately, big, professional, the kind of still that isn't relaxed, it's controlled. The third man was between them, and that was wrong, because men like the first 2 didn't usually walk in the middle of anyone. They walked in front or behind, and they were watching outward, not inward. But this one, the one in the center, had something wrong with his left arm. It was hanging. Not broken hanging, but the careful, deliberate, not moving of someone managing serious pain. His charcoal suit jacket was dark on one side, in a way that had nothing to do with rain. And there was rain, too. All 3 of them were soaked. Tessa had grown up in a neighborhood where you learned very quickly to read a room before you opened your mouth. So she stood still behind the counter, tea in hand, and watched the 3 of them settle into the booth, farthest from the windows, backs to the wall. The 2 big men she'd later learn their names. But that night they were just problem, and bigger problems sat on the outside edges. The injured man in the center pulled off his jacket with the careful economy of someone who'd done this before, assessed damage before. Tessa set down her mug. She grabbed the coffee pot, because that was the job, and walked over. "Coffee," she said. The man in the center looked up at her. She'd seen photographs of Roman Veyr exactly once, in a newspaper article she'd skimmed at a laundromat 2 years before. The article had called him the city's shadow, which was the kind of florid nonsense newspapers printed when they wanted to seem edgy without actually saying anything. What she remembered from the photo was that he looked younger than the reputation suggested. In person, he looked tired, not soft tired, Tired the way a machine is tired after it's been run past its limits. His eyes were the kind of dark that didn't soften in lamplight, and there was a cut above his left eyebrow that had dried into a crust. He was 34, maybe. He had the bone structure of someone whose face photographers would call severe, and whose enemies would call something much less poetic. Coffee, he said, and a first aid kit, if you have one. We have a kit. She didn't move yet. The coffee's fresh. The kit's from 2019. Best I can do. Fine. She brought both. Set Suggs down, set the kit on the edge of the table, and then stood back and waited, because she wasn't going anywhere near that wound, without being asked and without understanding what she was walking into. The larger of the two men, the one with the jaw like a cinder block, opened the kit and started sorting through it. Roman wrapped his right hand around the coffee mug and drank without wincing at the heat, which told her something about his pain threshold. She went back behind the counter. For 12 minutes, she refilled sugar dispensers and tried very hard not to watch what was happening in that booth. She heard them talking low. She caught fragments. A name Silas said, with a particular kind of flatness that meant history. The clink of glass from the kit. A sharp intake of breath from the injured man that he shut down fast. Then she heard the mug hit the counter from across the room. She looked up. Roman's jaw was set. His eyes were on her. I asked for a refill 2 minutes ago. Tessa looked at him. Then she looked at the two men with him. The one with the cinder-block jaw was watching her with the expression of a man calibrating a threat. The other one had his hand near his jacket in a way that was casual and not casual at all. You didn't ask for anything, she said. I'm asking now. His voice had dropped into something that was supposed to make people move faster. Tessa picked up the pot. She walked over. She stood on the other side of the table from him, and she held the coffee pot so it was level with the open wound on his arm. The gauze they'd started wrapping was still loose, and the skin beneath was angry and red, and she looked him in the eye. If you yell at me, she said, keeping her voice perfectly even, this goes directly into your arm. The man with the cinder-block jaw, Brock Serrano, she'd learned, drew a gun so fast, she barely tracked the movement. The barrel was between her eyes before she'd finished her sentence. Tessa did not blink. She did not flinch. She held Roman Veyr's gaze and waited. The thing people never understood about exhaustion, real exhaustion, the years-long kind is that at a certain point it becomes its own kind of armor. Tessa had been threatened by landlords and ex-boyfriends and angry customers and overdue bills for so long that the gun felt like just another version of the same conversation. She was tired. She was cold. She had $412 in 6 days to figure out rent. A gun was not actually the most frightening thing she'd faced that week. Roman stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed. It wasn't a performing laugh. It wasn't a king amused by the gesture laugh. It was the sound of someone who had genuinely been surprised, which, she would later understand, almost never happened to him. He waved one hand at Brock. The gun disappeared. Refill the coffee, Roman said. Please. The please landed like it had been excavated from somewhere deep and unused. Tessa refilled his mug. Then she went back to the kit, crouched down next to the booth, and said, let me see it. He didn't argue. The wound was a knife cut, long, not deep enough to hit anything critical, but badly cared for. She cleaned it with what they had, which was antiseptic wipes and gauze, and the kind of practical efficiency she'd developed from 7 years of kitchen accidents and broken glass and one memorable incident with a deep fryer. Brock watched her work with the focused attention of a man deciding whether to trust her. She finished wrapping it with gauze, and, when the tape ran out, tore a strip of duct tape from the underside of the counter. She kept it there. People stole the Scotch tape constantly and pressed it across the edge. That'll hold until you get stitches, she said. You need stitches. I know. Then go get them. I'm having coffee first. She straightened up, looked down at him. Suit yourself. She went back to her side of the counter. They stayed for 40 minutes. Nobody else came in. Tessa wiped down the tables, restocked the napkin holders, started rolling silverware into paper sleeves for the morning rush. The three men talked in low voices she didn't try to hear. At one point, Roman spread something across the table papers. She thought, though she didn't look directly, and the conversation went technical in a way she didn't follow. At 4:08, all three of them stood up. Brock left a folded 20 on the table. Roman reached past him and set something else beneath his coffee mug. Then he looked at Tessa once, directly, the way people look when they're memorizing something, and walked out. She waited until the door closed. Then she walked over and lifted the mug. $500. 5 neat $100 bills, folded once. Tessa stood there for a while. Then she put the money in her apron pocket, picked up the mug, took it to the dishwashing station, and went back to rolling silverware. She didn't sleep well that day, but she paid her rent. 24 hours later, the bell above the door rang at 3:08 Roman Veyr walked in alone. No Brock, no other man. Just him, wearing a different suit, dark navy. No blood, with his left arm in a proper bandage now. The stiffness of stitches visible in how he held himself. Tessa looked up from the counter where she was reading a paperback with a cracked spine. "We're open," she said, because that was the only sensible thing to say. He sat on the same stool, same back-to-the-wall position, angled so the window and the door were both in his sight line. She poured him coffee without being asked. "I have a proposal," Roman said. Tessa folded her book open on the counter and looked at him. "Okay, there are people in this city who want me dead. Most of them know my roots, my buildings, my restaurants." He wrapped his hand around the mug. "They don't know this place. They would never think to look here. That's probably because it's a bad diner." "Yes." He said it without any particular judgment. $500 every night. "I sit here, I work, I don't bother you. And you ask me nothing." Tessa thought about this for exactly 4 seconds. She'd known, in the broad strokes, who he was the moment she'd recognized him. She wasn't naive. She'd grown up in this city her whole life. The Veyr name wasn't one you had to look up. But she also had $412, and the rent was still mostly her problem. And whatever he was, he'd said please when she made him. "My rules," she said. Roman looked at her with an expression that suggested no one had said those words to him in a very long time. "No violence on my floor," Tessa said. "No yelling. No trouble brought through that door. I can't promise. Those aren't negotiating points," she said. "Those are the rules. If you can't work with them, drink your coffee and go." He was quiet for a moment. "All right," he said. "And the coffee is $2. I understand. So you owe me $498 change." He reached into his jacket, set $498 on the counter in what looked like a physically painful demonstration of submission. Tessa picked up her book. "Don't leave blood on my floor this time," she said. Neither of them said another word for the next 2 hours. Roman spread ledgers across the booth. Tessa read her book and drank her tea. Outside, the snow kept falling. She didn't know it yet, but something had shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically. The way tectonic plates shift invisible, inevitable, and only recognizable in the aftermath. Roman Veyr came back the next night, and the night after that. By the 3rd week, there was a pattern. He arrived between 3:00 and 3:20. He ordered black coffee. He worked through whatever papers or devices he'd brought. He left between 5:30 and 6:00. He never spoke unless she did first, and she almost never did first. Tessa noticed things in the way you notice things about a person when you're sharing space with them in silence for hours. It's a different kind of knowing than conversation gives you. More honest sometimes. He never sat facing away from the door. When his phone rang, his jaw changed. Not obviously, but it changed. Whatever the call was, even if he sounded calm on it, the next 20 minutes after he hung up, he was quieter. More still. The kind of still that was actually noise turned inward. He always ordered the same thing, and never once asked what the specials were, which she found interesting, because the kind of person who trusted their environment looked at the board. He didn't look at anything he didn't need to look at. He always left exactly on time, except once, when she asked him what the ledger was for, and he looked up at her with an expression she couldn't fully read and said, "You sure you want to know?" "Probably not," she said. "Never mind." He almost smiled at that. It didn't reach his whole face, but it was there. She noticed his shoes were expensive. She noticed he had a scar on the back of his right hand that looked old and deliberate. She noticed he took his coffee without milk or sugar and drank it at a temperature that should have burned. And she noticed she couldn't help but notice that he noticed her too. Not in the way she was used to men noticing her, across a counter at 3 in the morning. That kind of noticing she could handle with one hand and a flat look. This was different. This was observation. like he was adding her to a list of things he needed to understand. She didn't know what to do with that yet, so she didn't do anything. The new boots appeared on a Tuesday. She came in for her shift and found a box on the counter near the back door, where she hung her coat. No note. The box had a logo she recognized, expensive outdoors brand, the kind of winter boot that actually kept water out. Her size exactly. She looked at them for a long time. Then she looked up at the one camera that covered the back area and said, to no one in particular, this doesn't mean anything. She wore them that night. Roman didn't say a word about when he came in at 3:11, but she caught him glance down once, just once, and something in his face settled in a way it didn't usually settle. 2 weeks later, a space heater appeared behind the counter, plugged into the wall, pointed exactly where she usually stood. She hadn't mentioned the cold. He just noticed. Then the tea. A whole box of the specific kind she drank. She'd never told him what kind sitting on the count when she arrived for her shift. Tessa sat down on her stool and stared at the box of tea. This was getting complicated. She wasn't a woman who fell easily. She'd done it exactly once, with a man named Derek Holloway, and that had taken 7 years of her life and a self-respect she'd had to excavate from the rubble piece by piece when he was done with her. She'd been 22 when she met Derek, and 27 when she stopped letting herself think about what she might have been if she'd chosen differently. She wasn't doing that again. She was not that kind of fool twice. But she also wasn't the kind of woman who pretended things weren't happening when they were clearly happening. Something was happening. She just didn't know yet if it was dangerous or safe or worse, both. The night with the drunk customer was a Thursday in January. He'd been at the counter since 1:00 a.m., nursing coffee that she kept watering down, trying to slow him. Not because she had to, but because it was the right thing to do, and she generally did the right thing even when it cost her. By 3:30 he was belligerent in the slow, escalating way that was always worse than the fast kind. Roman had come in at 3:15. He was in his booth. He'd nodded at her when he arrived, which was new. He'd started doing that recently, the acknowledging nod, and she hadn't decided what to do about it yet. The drunk customer reached across the counter and grabbed her wrist. "I'm talking to you," he said. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." Tessa didn't panic. She'd handled this before. She was already calculating the angle to twist her wrist free, already reaching with her other hand for the space near the register, where Sal kept the emergency panic button that had never once worked in 7 years. She didn't have to do either. A hand came down on the drunk man's shoulder from behind, and the man's grip went slack, so fast he might have been cut from a string. Roman didn't raise his voice. He didn't say anything dramatic. He leaned down close to the man's ear, and whatever he said was quiet enough that Tessa only caught fragments. Once. Last ever. The drunk man left without looking back. Roman straightened up. He looked at Tessa's wrist. She was rubbing it. Automatic. And then he looked at her face. And for the first time in all these weeks of shared silence, his expression was completely unguarded. He was furious. Not at her. The fury was pointed somewhere else. At the situation, at the fact that it had happened. And underneath that fury was something she wasn't ready to name yet. "You okay?" he asked. "Fine," she said. "I've handled worse." "I know you have." A pause. "That doesn't mean you should have to." He went back to his booth. Tessa stood behind the counter and let out a breath she'd been holding for about 90 seconds. Her hands were steady. Her chest wasn't. She was in serious trouble, and she knew it, and knowing it didn't help at all. She didn't find out until later that Brock had told Roman, when Roman mentioned the diner for the first time, that the waitress was a liability, that anyone Roman spent time near became a target eventually, that he should find somewhere else. Roman had said, "She's fine. Nobody's watching a diner." Brock had said, "You're watching it every night." Roman hadn't answered that. It was the kind of silence that said everything. The men came on a Wednesday night in February when the snow was the thick, serious kind that changed the sound of the city. Tessa was alone, Marcus. The overnight cook had called in sick, and it was slow enough that she hadn't replaced him. She was behind the counter at 2:47 a.m., with a crossword she couldn't finish, and a heater that was doing its honest best. Roman was due in 20 minutes. 2 men came through the door instead. She knew immediately, the same way she'd known with Roman that first night, the way they moved, the way they took in the room, the way their eyes went to the corners before they went to the counter. These weren't customers. He's not here, she said, because there was no point pretending. The taller one smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. That's okay. We'll wait. The diner's for paying customers. Then get us coffee. She got them coffee. She set the mugs down and stepped back. Her hands were steady. Her heart rate was not. You're the one he comes to see, the shorter one said. He was looking at her in a way she didn't like. Doesn't seem like much. Is there something you'd like to order off the menu? She said. We need to know where he is, the tall one said. Right now. Tonight. Where he goes after here. I don't know where he goes. You spend every night with him. He sits in a booth, and I pour coffee. That's it. The shorter one stood up from the stool. She tracked the movement. He came around the counter, which was a line, which was her space was a violation and she felt in her spine, and he grabbed the front of her apron. Don't, she said. Tell us where. The front door didn't open. It came inward like something had been thrown through it. She found out later that Roman had seen the unfamiliar car parked outside and understood the situation before he came through the door. That the speed wasn't luck, it was calculation. What she saw in the moment was Roman Veyr standing in the blown-open doorway, and then everything happened very fast and very loud, and she dropped behind the counter, because that was the sensible place to be, and glass was shattering, and Brock was there. Somehow, she didn't know when he'd arrived, and there were sounds she didn't let herself identify while she was crouched, with her hands over her head, and her heart hitting her ribs like it wanted to leave. Then silence. The particular silence that comes after noise like that. She stood up slowly. One of the men was on the floor, not moving in a way that meant unconscious, not dead, though she wasn't totally sure. The other one was propped against the wall, with Roman crouched in front of him, asking him something very quietly, very calmly. The calm was more frightening than the noise had been. Brock was standing between Tessa and the rest of the room with his back to her, which was a gesture she understood. Roman stood up. He turned around. He looked at her. There was blood on his knuckles. There was a gash along his cheekbone from something glass, she thought. His breathing was controlled, but not easy. And in his face was something she hadn't seen before. He'd seen fear in her eyes, just a flash of it, there and gone, because she'd locked it down, but he'd seen it. And it was doing something to him that had nothing to do with strategy. Tessa, he said. I'm fine, she said, automatically, the way she always said it. You're not. I will be. She looked around at what had been her diner 6 minutes ago. The glass. The overturned stools. The coffee spreading across the floor in the particular brown the dawn light makes. Is he our they? Roman said Brock. Yeah. Take them out. She watched Brock do that. She turned back to Roman. That's Silas, she said. The name you said. That first night. Roman looked at her with an expression that recalculated something. You were listening. I wasn't. I just remember things. She pulled her apron off, looked at it, set it on the counter. Who is he? A problem. Roman was watching her face. A problem I underestimated. Tessa, I'm going to... Don't say you're going to make it right, she said. Don't manage me. He stopped, closed his mouth, tried again. I'm going to give you money, more than enough to get out of the city for a few weeks. I'll make sure your apartment is safe. No, you don't understand. I understand exactly. Her voice was flat and certain, the way it got when she'd made a decision, and the decision was done. I knew who you were. I took your money. I let you in. She looked at the mess around them. That's on me as much as it's on you. Roman looked at her for a long time. That is not how this works, he said quietly. The risk is mine to take, Tessa. She crossed the space between them, which was maybe 4 feet, and she put her hand against the side of his face. The cut there. The exhaustion underneath it. The thing he was carrying that he'd never put down voluntarily. You didn't make me a target, she said. They already knew where to look. Leaving doesn't unfind me. His jaw moved. He was working through something. And she said, You need stitches again. The sound he made was almost a laugh. Almost. Then she kissed him. It wasn't careful. She wasn't a careful person. When she finally decided to do something, she was deliberate, though. She always had been. He went still for just a second, genuine surprise, again the excavated kind, and then he kissed her back with a particular desperate focus of someone who hadn't let themselves want something in a very long time. Outside, far away, a police siren started. Then another. Roman pulled back. His hand was still on her face. He was listening. "They're coming here," he said. Tessa looked at the destroyed diner. "Yeah," she said, "they are. I have to move you. Get you somewhere safe while my people—" "I know." She grabbed her coat from the hook by the back door. "Lead the way." He looked at her, the coat in her hands, the steadiness in her face, the way she was already moving. "You're not going to be scared, are you?" he said. "I'm terrified," Tessa said and opened the back door. "Let's go." The back door of Marlowe's opened onto a service alley that smelled like old grease and wet concrete, and Tessa walked into it without hesitating, which Roman noticed and filed somewhere he'd look at later when he had time to think. He didn't have time to think. He had 3 vehicles, 2 of them now compromised, because Silas's men had been watching the diner, which meant they'd been watching longer than Roman had assumed, which meant his read on the timeline was off, which meant other things he'd assumed were also probably off. He ran the math in the 6 seconds it took to walk from the back door to where Brock had pulled around in a dark sedan that wasn't registered to anything that would trace back. "Front's clean?" Roman asked. 2 units, 3 minutes out, maybe less. Brock was already pulling. "I swept the alley when I came in." "The 2 from side?" "Handled. They won't be talking tonight." Roman got in the back. Tessa got in beside him without being asked, without looking for instructions, without any of the hesitation he expected from someone who'd just watched a diner get partially destroyed around her. She pulled her coat closed, looked straight ahead, and said nothing. He looked at her profile in the passing streetlights. She was pale. Her jaw was set so tight, he could see the muscle working. But her hands were in her lap, and they were still. But this woman was genuinely something else. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Waterfront facility," Roman said. "It's secure." "How secure?" "No one's ever found it who wasn't supposed to." She nodded. Once. Like she was checking a box. Brock drove without the sirens ever getting closer, which meant the approach had been blocked somewhere upstream by someone. Roman had told to do exactly that 2 weeks ago, when he'd started contingency planning for the possibility that Silas moved faster than expected. It was the only thing tonight that had gone according to plan. They drove for 19 minutes without speaking. Tessa used 8 of those minutes to look out the window. Then she turned to Roman and said, "Tell me about Silas Merrick." Brock's eyes moved to the rearview mirror. Roman looked at her. "Why?" "Because I was just grabbed by one of his people in my place of work, and I'd like to understand what I'm dealing with." Roman thought about deflecting. He thought about it seriously for about 4 seconds, and then he looked at the set of her jaw and decided that deflecting Tessa Rowan was an energy expenditure he didn't have tonight. "He was my father's man before he was mine," Roman said. "Ran operations for 12 years. When my father died, I inherited the organization, and Silas came with it." He smiled at the funeral. He put his hand on my shoulder and told me my father was a great man. And for 2 years he ran his half of the organization well. Then I started finding inconsistencies. Money going somewhere it shouldn't. Contacts being approached before I'd authorized contact. Small things. The kind of small things you only notice if you're already watching for them. "Were you?" "I'm always watching for them." He said it without pride. Just fact. 6 months ago I started pulling back his authority quietly. Redirecting resources. Shrinking his circle without him realizing it was being shrunk. He realized, Tessa said. He realized Roman agreed. Faster than I expected. She was quiet for a moment. "Then, who else knows about the diner?" "My inner people. 6, maybe 7, one of them told him." Roman's jaw moved. "Yes. Do you know which one?" "I have 3 candidates." "How do you narrow it down?" Brock made a sound in the front seat that might have been a laugh and might have been a cough. Roman looked at the back of his head. "We're working on it," Roman said. Tessa turned back to the window. "Work faster," she said. And that was the end of that conversation. The waterfront facility didn't look like anything from the outside. That was the point. It was a logistics company. The name painted on the side in faded letters that were deliberately faded. The kind of weathered credibility you couldn't fake without time. Inside, however, it was something else entirely. When Brock pulled through the gated back entrance and the doors sealed behind them, Tessa stepped out of the car and stood still for a moment, taking it in. She didn't say anything, but her eyes moved across the space with the same methodical attention she used of the diner, registering, cataloging, deciding what mattered. Armed men at 2 positions she could see. Probably more she couldn't. cameras covering every angle, a communications setup in the far corner that looked more serious than anything she'd seen outside of a crime drama. 3 vehicles parked under tarps. A door at the back that led somewhere she'd have to go through 2 keyed checkpoints to reach. Roman watched her look at all of it. "You've built yourself a bunker," she said. "I've built myself options," he said. "There's a difference." "Is there?" He didn't answer that. A man came across the floor toward the mid-50s, heavy sits, moving with the particular urgency of someone who'd been awake, managing a crisis for the last several hours. His name was Carver, and he ran the facility's daily operations, and he was one of the 7 people who knew about Marlowe's. Roman clocked that fact again, let it settle into the part of his brain that was running the traitor calculation constantly, like a background process. "We've got a problem," Carver said, which was the least useful opening sentence Roman had heard all night. "Tell me something I don't know." "Silas has people at the East Bridge checkpoint and the Halverson building. He's cut off your direct lines to the Southside captains. Nobody's gotten through in the last 90 minutes. My phone jammed. Not here, but anything going out to that corridor is being intercepted. He has a tech team, a good one." Carver looked at Tessa. His expression was a careful neutral. "She's with me," Roman said. Carver accepted this, the way people accepted Roman's decisions completely, with whatever real feelings locked, somewhere he'd never see. "What do you need first?" Carver asked. "A room for her. And then everyone in the main space in 10 minutes. Tessa put a hand on Roman's arm. He stopped. "I don't need a room," she said. "I need to be where you are. Tessa, if something happens to you while I'm sitting in a back room, I have no way to get out of here. None of these people know me. None of them owe me anything." She said it completely without drama. Just the actual logic of the situation presented clearly. "I'm safer where you are." She wasn't wrong. He hated that she wasn't wrong. "Fine," he said. "Stay close. I always do," she said. And there was something in the way she said it that made him look at her again. And the look lasted a second longer than it should have. Carver pretended not to notice, badly. The 10-minute meeting happened in the main space with 8 of Roman's senior people gathered in the loose semicircle of men who'd learned to stand at angles so they could see every entrance. Tessa stood slightly to Roman's left and slightly behind, not hiding, not performing, just occupying space quietly in the way she'd learned to occupy the diner present without demanding attention. Roman laid out the situation in flat, sequential sentences. Silas's move on the diner. The 2 men dealt with. Police response managed. The communication jam on the South Side corridor. He didn't editorialize. He didn't make it sound worse or better than it was. Then he stopped talking and waited. 7 of the 8 men started talking at once. The 8th man, whose name was Garrett and whose job was to coordinate the South Side operations, said nothing. He stood with his arms crossed and his eyes slightly down and to the left, and Tessa watched him the way she watched the section of diner that was about to need attention before anyone at the tables knew they needed anything. She said nothing. She filed it. The argument going on in front of her was about response. 3 men wanted immediate retaliation. Find Silas. Move tonight. End it. 2 men wanted to wait, consolidate, verify the extent of his network before acting. 1 man, the oldest one in the room, said they should send an offer of negotiation, which earned him a look from Roman that shut that down completely. Brock stood slightly behind Roman's right shoulder and said nothing, which was what Brock did. He was not a strategy man. He was a when and how man. And he waited for when and how. Roman let the argument run for 4 minutes. Then he said, "Stop." They stopped. "Silas has been building toward this for at least 6 months, Roman said. He has a tech team, which costs money, which means he's been liquid in ways we didn't track. He has people at 2 of my checkpoints, which means he has access to information about those checkpoints, which means someone in this room or close to it has been sharing." The room went very still. This was the kind of still that was different from controlled. This was the still of people checking themselves and checking the people next to them simultaneously. Garrett's eyes went to the floor. Tessa saw it. She made herself look away before anyone saw her see it. "I'm not doing a hunt tonight," Roman said. "We have one objective. I need a clean line to the South Side before sunrise. Carver, what do we have that bypasses the East Bridge corridor?" "There's the secondary relay at the port, but it's not set up for Monans. Set it up. That's 3 hours of work. Then start now." Carver left. 4 of the other men left with him, or broke off toward their own tasks. Garrett moved to leave with the group. Garrett, Roman said. Garrett stopped. Yeah, you're with me for the next 2 hours. Garrett's expression didn't change. That was the problem. A man who'd heard his name, called in a room that had just been discussing a traitor, would have some kind of reaction. Nervousness, or overcompensated casualness, or relief at being trusted enough to stay close. Garrett's face did none of those things. It went through a practiced calm that was indistinguishable from real calm unless you were looking for the practice. Tessa was looking for it. Sure, Garrett said. Whatever you need. Roman nodded and turned toward the communications corner. Tessa fell into step beside him, and as she passed him, she let her eyes move to his face for just a second, and she saw that he had seen what she'd seen. He'd known before he said the name. He was keeping Garrett close on purpose. She understood then, with a kind of cold clarity, that this was how Roman operated, not loudly, not with drama, not with the spectacular violence that his reputation suggested. He operated the way pressure operates, slowly, certainly, without announcing itself until the moment it was already done. She wasn't sure if that made her feel safer or more unsettled. Both, probably. The way it was both with him in most things. They spent the next hour at the communication setup. Carver's people worked on the port relay. Brock stood near the entrance. Garrett sat 12 feet away with his phone out, doing something Roman had given him to do, and his face was calm, and his hands were steady, and Tessa watched him anyway. She was running on no sleep, and the particular wired alertness that follows real fear, and she sat in a chair beside Roman's workstation, and drank bad coffee from a machine in the corner that was somehow worse than Marlowe's, which she hadn't thought possible. Roman was on his 3rd set of documents when he looked up and found her watching Garrett. He leaned slightly toward her, not enough to be visible. What do you see? He keeps checking his phone, but he's not responding to anything. She kept her voice at the level of breath. He looks at it, then he puts it down, like he's waiting for something. And the something hasn't happened yet. Roman looked at his own documents for a moment. What else? Twice in the last hour he's looked at the back door. Not the main entrance. The back. She paused, and he was the first person to suggest you move against Silas tonight. Roman was quiet. If you move against Silas tonight, she said, and Silas knows you're coming. Then I walk into what I walked Silas's men into at the diner, Roman said, very quietly. Yes. Roman didn't move for 10 seconds. Then he picked up his pen and went back to his accountants like the conversation hadn't happened. Tessa sat back in her chair and drank her terrible coffee. She'd been a waitress for 7 years. She'd learned to read a table who was upset, who was pretending not to be, who was about to cause a problem, who needed attention before they knew they needed it. She'd learned to track 7 tables at once while carrying 4 plates and answering a question from the cook and remembering that the couple in the corner had a nut allergy. She had not expected that skill set to be useful here. It was, though. Apparently. Horribly. An hour later, Brock appeared at Roman's shoulder and bent to say something. Roman listened. His face went through the change she'd learned to watch for the jaw, the barely there adjustment behind his eyes. He stood up. I need to step out for 10 minutes, he told her. He said it like it was normal. Like men who ran criminal organizations stepped out for 10 minutes all the time. Okay, she said. He looked at her for a half-second longer than the situation required. Stay here. I will. He left with Brock. 3 other men went with them through the main door. Garrett looked at his phone again. Then he looked at the back door. Then he looked at Tessa. She was already looking at him. For a moment, neither of them moved. It was the particular frozen moment of 2 people who both know that the other one knows, and both of them processing what that means. Garrett stood up. Tessa stood up. Sit down, she said. Her voice was completely flat. Sit back down. He was twice her size. He was somewhere in his late 30s, ex-military by the posture, and he had a gun under his jacket that she absolutely did not have. He also hadn't expected her to say anything. She could see that the micro-flinch of surprise, the recalculation. You don't know what You've checked your phone 11 times in the last hour, and you haven't typed a response once, she said. You looked at the back door twice. You suggested Roman move on Silas tonight, before Roman even finished laying out the situation. She kept her voice at the same flat register. You've been waiting for something, and it hasn't come through, which means Silas's people are running late, or something went wrong with the communication jam on their end, which means you don't know when they're coming or from where. Garrett looked at her. Sit down, she said again. Because when Roman comes back in the next 3 minutes, if you're standing up and I'm standing up, this conversation is going to go very badly for you, very fast. But if you sit down, maybe you have a different conversation. Maybe there's a different outcome. She paused. Sit. Down. Garrett sat down. His jaw was working. His hands on the table were flat and still, which was controlled. But his breathing had changed, and she could see his chest moving faster. She sat down too. She picked up her coffee. She looked at the documents in front of her like she was reading them. Her heart was hitting her sternum so hard. She was mildly surprised nobody could hear it. Roman came back in at the 8-minute mark, which was faster than 10. He looked at the room, and at Tessa, and at Garrett, and at Tessa again, and something in his face changed in a way that was very quiet and very final. He walked to the table. He sat down across from Garrett. Phone, he said. Garrett looked at him. Give me your phone. Roman Garrett. Roman's voice was the voice he'd used on the drunk man who grabbed Tessa's wrist, not loud, not threatening in the conventional sense, just completely certain. Give me the phone. Garrett put the phone on the table. Roman picked it up, looked at it. His expression didn't change, but something behind it did, the way the surface of water doesn't change when something shifts underneath. You were waiting for confirmation, Roman said. That I was moving tonight, so you could tell them which route. Garrett said nothing. I've known for 11 days, Roman said. I gave you specific information about 3 different possible routes. Only one of the routes was ever real. Silas's people positioned themselves on it 4 days ago. He set the phone down on the table between them. You were good at this, Garrett. You were very careful. But you made one mistake. What mistake? Garrett's voice was still controlled. Still trying. You recruited from inside, Roman said. And the person you tried to recruit told me the same day. Garrett's face went through something then. Not the practiced calm. The real thing underneath fear. The specific fear of a man who has run out of moves. I have a family, Garrett said. I know. Silas said if I didn't. I know. Roman stood up. Brock. What happened next was fast and professional, and Tessa looked at the documents in front of her and breathed through her nose until it was over. When she looked up, Garrett was gone, and 2 of Carvar's men were near the back door, and Roman was standing at the communication station with his back to the room. He stood like that for a long moment. Then he turned around and looked at her. You sat him down, Roman said. Yes, how did you know he wouldn't? I didn't, she said. I just needed him to still be in the room when you got back. Roman looked at her for a long time. The kind of look that had weight to it, that was doing something more than looking. Silas is going to move tomorrow night, Roman said. Maybe sooner. He's lost his line into this facility, and he knows it, which means he'll move before we can take advantage of the gap. Then you move first, Tessa said. Yes. Tonight. Yes. She nodded. Then tell me what you need. Roman opened his mouth to tell her that what he needed was for her to stay here, stay safe, stay out of it. All the things that were technically true were also, he was beginning to understand, things that Tessa Rowan was going to quietly and completely refuse. Before he said any of it, Brock came back through the door. We've got a problem, Brock said. The port relay's up, but Silas has moved. He's not at the position we had him. He's consolidated at the Southside Warehouse, Halverson, block, east side, and he's pulled in numbers. A lot of numbers. Roman went still. How many? He asked. Carver thinks 30 plus, maybe 40. Brock paused. He's not hiding anymore. He's not waiting. He set up a position, Roman. He wants you to come to him. Why? It wasn't a question. Roman was already working through it. Because someone told him about the plan, Brock said. He looked at the empty spot where Garrett had been sitting. Someone told him your timeline. Garrett gave him something before we took his phone, Roman said. Or before tonight. Brock's voice was flat. The recruitment that your contact flagged, the one that tipped you to Garrett, when did you get that information? 11 days ago. And how much of your planning happened in the last 11 days? In rooms Garrett had access to. Roman's jaw tightened. Most of it. Then Silas has most of it. Brock looked at him straight. He's not set up at the Halverson block, waiting for a fight, Roman. He set up a kill box. He wants you to walk in, and he's got the angles covered. The room was very quiet. Tessa set down her coffee. She looked at the communications setup. She looked at the screens that were cycling through different camera feeds' exterior views, mostly, but also a few interior ones from what looked like dock facilities and a parking structure. Her eyes moved across them with the same rhythm she used on a busy Friday night when she was triaging 6 tables at once. She stopped on one screen. "What's that one?" she asked. Everyone looked at her. "That feed," she said, pointing. "What facility is that?" Carver crossed to her, looked at the screen. "Port surveillance. Our relay camera on the Halverson block's east perimeter." There, she touched the corner of the screen. "That SUV. It hasn't moved." "The street's blocked off," Carver said. "Construction." "It's been there for 4 days," Tessa said. "You said Silas's people positioned on the route 4 days ago." She looked at Roman. "That's not a construction blockade. That's him." Roman crossed to the screen. She was right. The SUV was parked at the one angle that covered the entrance to the drainage trench that ran along the warehouse east side, the one maintenance access point that wouldn't show up on a standard approach analysis because it wasn't on the building architectural plans. It was on the city's water management infrastructure maps, which were a different document type. "He doesn't know about the drainage trench," Tessa said. "He can't. It's not in the building's plans I can see from this angle. It connects to the infrastructure on the city side, not the building side. He'd have to have pulled city utility maps to know about it." "How do you—" Carver started. "I've been looking at these screens for 20 minutes, she said, "and I grew up 6 blocks from that warehouse. My uncle worked city utilities for 30 years. She looked at Roman. "If you could reach it from the north, you'd be behind that SUV." Behind his position, Roman looked at the screen. Then he looked at her. Something passed across his face that was different from anything she'd seen on it yet. Not gratitude she'd seen gratitude before. It was simpler than this. Something that was arriving at a conclusion it hadn't expected. "Brock," Roman said, not looking away from her. "Yeah, pull everything we have on the Halverson block's north perimeter." "Already on it," Brock said. Tessa stepped back from the screen. Her hands were completely still. Her heart was not. She had just told a room full of dangerous men how to approach a kill box that was intended for their boss. She had just used the skills of a woman who had spent 7 years watching where people moved and where congestion formed and which path was always empty. She had just made herself part of this, not as a bystander, not as a woman who'd been caught up in something through no choice of her own, but as an active participant in something she could not walk back from with a clear conscience. She knew it. She felt it settle into her chest like a stone. Roman finally looked away from the screen and back at her. He was reading her face, doing that thing where he looked at her long enough to get past the surface. "You don't have to stay for this part," he said. "I know," she said. "There's a safe room in the back with a Roman." She said his name and his mouth closed. "I know where the safe room is. I identified it when we walked in." She looked at the screen. "But I also just found you an exit. So maybe don't put me in a safe room." She paused. "Maybe put me at those screens." The room was waiting. Brock, who had seen Roman Veyr operate for 9 years, watched his boss stand very still and look at a woman who walked through the back door of a crime lord's logistics facility 3 hours ago and somehow become necessary. Roman looked at the screens. He looked at the feed. He looked at the drainage trench that his enemy had no idea existed. He looked at Tessa. "Don't leave this building," he said. "I won't. Don't open any external communications without Carver." "Okay. And if something goes wrong, tell me where the gun is," she said. He told her. Then he kissed her once, quick and hard. The way a man kisses someone when he's aware that the next few hours have outcomes he can't fully control, and he pulled back and looked at her face one more time. "I'll be back with coffee," he said. "You'd better," she said. "The machine here is terrible." He almost smiled. Then he turned, said 3 words to Brock, and walked toward the door with 6 men falling into formation around him. The door closed. Tessa turned to the screens. Her hands, she noticed, were shaking slightly now. Just slightly. The adrenaline working its way back out. She breathed through it. She sat down in front of the screens. She began to watch. The screens were not like watching television. Tessa understood that within the first 4 minutes of sitting alone in front of them, television had sound and editing, and someone had already decided what was important. These feeds were raw and simultaneous and in different 6 angles, at once, all of them showing different pieces of the same city, and none of them telling her which piece mattered yet. She sat with her hands flat on the desk in front of her and made herself breathe slowly and look at each feed in sequence, left to right, top to bottom. The way she moved through the diner when she was reading the room, not rushing toward the loudest table, but scanning all of them first. But scanning all of them first because was never where the noise was. It was always somewhere quieter. Carver was at the communications relay 12 feet to her left, headset on, talking in clipped half-sentences to people she couldn't hear. Two of his technicians were working stations nearby. They'd accepted her presence at the screens with the same complete lack of ceremony that Carver had accepted everything. Roman said totally, professionally, and without any visible feelings about it. She appreciated that. She didn't have energy for feelings right now, hers or anyone else's. The feed cycled port exterior, dock perimeter, 2 street-level angles on the Halverson block's north face, an elevated shot from somewhere high a building, a crane. She wasn't sure that gave her the warehouse complex from above, or close to it, and the drainage trench. A fixed camera, low to the ground, pointed along the concrete channel that ran the length of the warehouse's east side and connected, at the north end, to the city's water infrastructure access points. She watched the SUV on the east perimeter feed. It hadn't moved. Inside it, or nearby, was a man or men who thought they were covering the only hidden approach to the warehouse. They were wrong, but they didn't know they were wrong yet, and the window between them not knowing and Roman reaching the trench was the entire plan. 12 minutes after Roman left, Carver pulled his headset down and looked at her. "They're at the north staging point," he said. 7 minutes from the trench entry. "Any movement on the east perimeter?" Carver looked at his screen. SUV stationary. 2 heat signatures inside. "What about the warehouse interior?" He hesitated. "What?" she said. "Our interior thermal is limited. We have a relay camera on the northwest loading bay, but the east side of the building." He paused. "We don't have good coverage inside the east side, so we don't know what's between the trench exit and Silas." "No," Carver said, "we don't." Tessa looked at the overhead feed. The warehouse complex was large, 3 connected buildings, according to what she'd pieced together from the various angles. The drainage trench came up near the junction between the first and second building, which meant Roman would exit into a corridor of sorts, an outdoor space between 2 structures, before he could get eyes on the main warehouse floor, where Silas had positioned his people. She traced the route in her head. Then she traced it again, because the first time she'd taken a turn that didn't feel right. "Carver," she said, "what's directly east of the trench exit, inside the property line?" He pulled up something on his screen. "Loading dock equipment. Some kind of vehicle staging area." "There should be, yeah. There are vehicles there. Parked." "How many?" 4 or 5. "Can't tell from the thermal resolution." Cover, she thought. If Roman came up out of the trench and there were vehicles between him and the warehouse's east wall, he had something to move behind. "Can you tell him?" she asked. "Get word to him?" "He has a radio. Limited range, but inside the perimeter it should—" Carver was already pulling the headset back up. He spoke, waited, spoke again. The wait was 20 seconds. It felt considerably longer. "He copies," Carver said. Tessa let out a breath, picked up her terrible coffee, put it back down because her hands weren't as steady as she wanted them. She watched the screens. At the 7-minute mark, the overhead feed showed movement at the north end of the drainage trench. Small shapes, moving low and fast. She counted them 6, 7, 8. Roman and his people entering the trench from the city infrastructure side. The SUV on the east perimeter feed didn't move. At the 9-minute mark, the shapes on the overhead feed reached the midpoint of the trench. At the 11-minute mark, Carver's headset crackled. She heard it from where she was sitting, not words, just the crackle. But Carver's shoulders changed. That was enough. "What?" she said. Carver pulled the headset partway off. His face was doing something careful. "We have a problem." "Tell me." "There's a second team." He was looking at his screen, then at her, then back. A second team just activated on the south approach. They weren't there 20 minutes ago. They were staged somewhere else. Somewhere we didn't have a camera, and they've just moved into position. Tessa stood up. "How many thermal shows?" "At least 12. Maybe 15. Carver's voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it that wasn't. "They're cutting off the south exit." "Roman's team is in the trench?" They're committed to the east approach and dumb south. Now the south is blocked, she said. Yes, so when they come up out of the trench, they come out into a position that has Silas's main force in front of them and a second team closing from the south. Carver looked at her directly. It's a pincer. Silas never planned to fight Roman at the warehouse. He planned to let him walk in and close around him. Tessa stood completely still for 1 full second. Garrett, she thought. 11 days. How much of the planning happened in rooms Garrett had access to? Most of it. The drainage trench had been part of the planning. She'd suggested it tonight, yes, but Roman had told his people, and Garrett had been in the room, and Garrett had had a phone. And how long before Roman exits the trench? She asked. 3 minutes, maybe less. Can you reach him? Radio range inside the perimeter is limited. Once he's in the trench itself, the signal degrades, the concrete channels it. I got through once, but Carver was already trying. She could see it from the way he was leaning into the headset, the set of his jaw. I'm not getting through. Keep trying, she said. She turned to the screens and stared at the overhead feed and made herself think. The second team on the south. Silas's main force on the warehouse floor, waiting. Roman's 8 men coming up out of the trench into a staging area, with 5 vehicles for cover. That Silas's people would now be moving through to close the gap. Her eyes went to the northwest loading bay feed, the one with limited coverage. The one showing the edge of the main warehouse floor where 2 men were visible near a bank of electrical panels. She stopped. She looked at the panels. Carver, her voice came out flat, and certain the way it did when she'd seen what she needed to see, and everything after was just execution. That transformer on the northwest loading bay feed. The main electrical panel for the warehouse complex, is that it? Carver looked. That's the main junction for the building power. Yeah. The transformer for the whole block is outside, on the... If you took it out, she said, the whole complex goes dark. Yes, but... In the dark, Silas's people don't know where Roman is. They're inside a building they know, and Roman's outside, in a staging area with vehicle cover, and suddenly, nobody can see anybody. Carver was looking at her. Your people are at the staging point outside, she said. Not in the building. Roman's team knows the trench exit. In the dark, moving outside is easier than moving inside. She looked at him. Can you reach anyone near that transformer? We have 2 people staged at the port approach their backup. They're not committed yet. Get them to the transformer, she said. Right now. Carver stared at her for 3 seconds. Then he pulled his headset up and started talking fast. Tessa watched the screens. The overhead feed showed Roman's team reaching the trench exit. Small shapes, slowing, preparing to surface. She could see at the south end of the property, the second team spreading into flanking positions. Maybe 90 seconds before the geometry became impossible. She watched Carver talk. She watched the northwest loading bay feed. She watched the SUV on the east perimeter, still stationary. The 2 heat signatures inside it, still and unaware. They're in position, Carver said. 30 seconds. Tell them to wait for my mark, she said. Carver looked at her. Then he set it into the headset. She watched the overhead feed. Roman shapes at the trench exit, ready to move. The south team closing 60 seconds away from closing the gap. Inside the warehouse, movement near the loading bay doors that she thought was Silas's people repositioning. She counted. She waited. She was waiting for the moment when Roman's team was committed to moving up and out of the trench, into the staging area, into the vehicle cover, but before the south team reached the angle where darkness wouldn't save them. 10 seconds now, she said. The northwest loading bay feed went to static. All of them did, for a half second, as the power cut killed everything including the relay cameras, but the backup generator kicked in for the facility's own systems, and the feeds came back in low-resolution, green emergency lighting. The warehouse complex on the overhead was dark. A solid dark, the kind that emergency lights couldn't touch from outside. The south team on the overhead feed slowed, then stopped. She could see the shapes, clustering, confused, losing the visual on what had been a clear approach 30 seconds ago. On the northwest feed, which had just enough emergency backup to show the loading bay's perimeter, nothing. Movement on the floor, but uncoordinated. Silas's people repositioning in a building that had just gone from lit to pitch black. She couldn't see Roman's team. The overhead resolution was too low. She could see the staging area. She could see vehicle shapes. She couldn't see the people. The radio crackled. She heard Brock's voice. 2 words were out. Tessa sat down. Her legs had decided to do that on their own, and she didn't argue with them. "Carver," she said. "I heard it," Carver said. His voice had changed in a way she recognized the release of something that had been held very tight. "They're out. They're in the staging area." She looked at the South team feed. Still stopped. Still trying to figure out what had happened to their approach. "Now Roman needs to know where Silas is," she said. "He's been trying to reach Roman. He's inside the building," she said. "Silas is inside the building, which is now dark, and Roman's team is outside." She was looking at the northwest feed. The 2 men who'd been near the electrical panels they'd moved. She tracked the shapes. "Carver, can you get a thermal reading on the warehouse interior? Any kind?" "The relay we have in the Northwest Bay has a basic sensor. It's not good resolution, but he was working at a station. Give me 60 seconds. She gave him 60 seconds. The image that came up was rough heat blobs on a cold background. The building's interior rendered in orange and red shapes, with no detail, just presence. But one shape was distinct. One shape was positioned at the back of the warehouse floor. Behind what the image suggested was a large structural element, a support column, maybe, or a vehicle, and around that shape, in a loose cluster, were 6 or 7 others. Silas and his inner people, pulled back, protected, waiting to see what happened next. "There," Tessa said, pointing. "I see it," Carver said. He was already talking into the headset. She listened to him relay the position. She watched the screens. She watched the South team beginning to move again. They'd made a decision. They were pressing forward even without visibility, which meant someone with authority had told them to keep moving regardless. "Carver." She kept her eyes on the South team. "The South team is still advancing. Whoever's running them, they haven't pulled back. I see it. If they reach the staging area before Roman's team can move." "Roman's moving," Carver said. He was listening to something in his headset she couldn't hear. "They're moving through the staging area, they're heading for the loading bay entrance, the northwest side. Going in," she thought. Roman's team was going into the dark building to reach Silas, instead of waiting for Silas to come out. She looked at the thermal image. Silas's cluster of shapes, the structural element they were sheltering behind. Then she saw something that made her stomach drop. 2 of the shapes near Silas's position were moving not toward the loading bay entrance, where Roman was heading, but perpendicular, toward the southeast corner of the building. The corner that had, based on the camera angles she'd been looking at for the last hour, a secondary exit she hadn't accounted for. They were running, not Silas. Silas's cluster was still in position, but 2 of his people were breaking toward the exit, and the southeast corner of the warehouse property connected, according to the city grid she had in her head, from growing up 6 blocks away, to an alley that ran straight to a parking structure that had 3 vehicle exits. If Silas had a car staged at that structure. "Carver," she said. "Southeast corner. 2 people running for the exit. Does Silas have a vehicle?" Carver was already looking. His face did something she hadn't seen on it yet. "The parking structure on Halverson East," he said slowly. We didn't surveil that structure. It wasn't in Roman's approach plan. Because it wasn't part of the approach plan, she said. It's an exit plan. Silas didn't plan to fight and win. He planned to lock Roman in and run. Carver's jaw worked. "Get Roman," she said. "He's in the building. Communications are. Get Brock. Brock's radio. Get Brock's radio." Carver was already trying. She heard him talking, heard static, heard a half response, and then static again. On the thermal feed, Roman's team was moving through the warehouse interior. She could see the shapes converging toward Silas's position. On the overhead feed, the South team was still advancing, slower now, losing confidence in the dark. And the 2 shapes from Silas's position had reached the southeast exit. She thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. Then she stood up, crossed to Carver's station, and pulled the headset from his head before he could react. "Brock," she said into it. "Brock, it's Tessa. Brock." Static. Then, "It's Tessa. Listen to me." 2 of Silas's people just exited the southeast corner, heading for the Halverson East parking structure. Silas has a vehicle staged there. If he reaches it. Static. She pushed through it, kept talking. Southeast corner, the alley between the warehouse and the machine shop, it connects to Halverson East in 2 blocks. If you have anyone not committed inside the building, you need to send them now. You need to cut off. Copy southeast. Brock's voice breaking in and out. Anyone, she said. Send anyone. Static again. Then, nothing. She stood with the headset in her hand and looked at Carver. Did he hear me? She asked. I don't know, Carver said, and his honesty was the most frightening thing he'd said all night. She put the headset back on the desk and walked back to her screens. She pulled her chair in. She put her hands flat on the desk, and she looked at the feeds, and she breathed. On the thermal feed, Roman's team had reached Silas's position. She watched the heat signatures move. Some went still in ways that meant one thing. Some stayed active, moving, chaotic. It was impossible to tell who was. Who the thermal didn't distinguish between Roman's people and Silas's people. It just showed living bodies and the spaces between them. 40 seconds that she counted. Then the shapes that were moving started moving in one direction, converging, and the shapes that were still in the specific concentrated way that told her the fight was done. But she was still watching the southeast corner. The two shapes from Silas's position had made it to the exterior. They were on the overhead feed now, moving through the alley. Behind them, a third shape had just cleared the southeast exit, taller than the other two. Moving differently, moving with the particular velocity of someone who had already decided everything behind them was finished, and the only thing that existed was the distance ahead. Silas. Silas was running. She grabbed the headset. Carver. That's him. The third shape out of the southeast exit, that's Silas. Carver looked. He grabbed his own communications. He was talking before she finished speaking. She watched the overhead feed. 3 shapes in the alley, moving fast. 40 seconds to the parking structure at this pace. Maybe less, the shapes were moving with the kind of desperate speed that burned through the last reserves. Roman's team inside the warehouse. Brock somewhere inside. Nobody in the alley. She watched. She kept watching. Because watching was the only thing she could do, and doing the only thing available to you was what you did when everything else was out of your hands. The 3 shapes reached the end of the alley, and then a 4th shape came from the left. One shape, moving at an angle that cut across the alley. Exit not running, moving deliberately. The particular movement of someone who had exactly enough space and was using all of it. The 3 shapes stopped. One of Silas's lead shapes moved toward the 4th shape. Went still. The second of Silas's lead shapes moved. Went still. Silas's shape didn't move. The 4th shape and Silas' shape stood facing each other in the alley. Exit on the overhead feed. 2 heat signatures 10 feet apart, and Tessa's breath stopped somewhere in her chest and didn't come back. The radio crackled. She heard Brock's voice, ragged and clear this time, the static gone. We have him, Brock said. Tessa put the headset down on the desk. She put both her hands flat on the surface and leaned forward on them, and let her head drop. Her shoulders were shaking. She discovered this, the way you discover things about your body in moments of overload. After the fact, once the control is no longer necessary, the thing you were holding arrives all at once. She breathed through it. She got it under control. She sat up. Carver, she said. Her voice came out nearly steady. What's the status on the South team? Carver was at his screens. His face was doing something that on a less contained man would have been awe. Pulling back. Without Silas's command, he checked. Yeah, they're pulling back, dispersing. And Roman? She asked. What about Roman? Carver went still. She'd read the room before he answered. She'd been reading rooms her whole life, and Carver's stillness before he answered was the kind that preceded something she didn't want to hear. And she sat in her chair and waited and made herself stay very, very still. Brock is reporting 2 wounded, Carver said. His team, 2 of his men took hits inside the warehouse. And Roman, she said. Roman took a hit on the approach through the loading bay. Carver was looking at his screen. His voice was careful and deliberate, in a way that told her the next sentence mattered very much. He's down, Tessa. He's down, but he's conscious. Brock says shoulder and leg. They're pulling him out now. She was already standing. Medical on call at the facility. Which entrance? She said. Tessa, which entrance are they coming in? Carver looked at her for half a second and made the correct decision. East gate. 8 minutes. She walked to the east gate. She stood there in the cold of the facility's interior, the kind of cold that seeped through concrete walls, and she thought about everything she was not going to do, which was fall apart, and everything she was going to do, which was stand here and wait and be the person he came back to. The east gate opened in 6 minutes, not 8. Brock came through first, and behind him, supported between two men, was Roman. He was upright, barely. His left leg was a problem she could see from 10 feet away, the way it was taking weight. His shoulder had been packed with something a field dressing, wadded and dark, and the arm on that side so was hanging with the same careful not moving as the very first night she'd ever seen him. His face, when he looked up and saw her, did something she'd never seen it do. Something broke open in it, not collapsed, not weak. Broke open the way a door breaks open sudden, and then a different kind of space behind it. "You're an idiot," she said. "I know," he said. "I told you not to do anything stupid." "I know." The shoulder, or what did shoulder and leg? He was breathing carefully. "I'll live." "You'd better." She stepped forward and took his right arm over her shoulder, because Brock was already supporting the left side, and the man between them needed a third point of stability, and she was it, and she was there, and that was what she was doing, right now. "Medical's inside?" "East wing," Brock said. "Let's go," she said. They walked him in. He was heavy against her shoulder, really heavy, not trying, not to be heavy, the actual weight of a man who was at the outside edge of what he had left. She felt his breathing change when they went through the inner door, felt the tension in him that was about not showing pain in front of his people. "You can stop performing," she said quietly. "I already know you're human." He made a sound that was something between a laugh and a hiss of pain. "Don't make me laugh," he said. "It hurts." "I'll make note of that," she said. They got him to the medical room. A doctor she hadn't seen before materialized, from somewhere kept on retainer. She gathered for exactly this kind of situation, and she stepped back and let the professionals take over. And she's trust, and watched. She watched him argue with the doctor about the anesthetic. She watched him lose that argument. She watched his face as the doctor began working, the way he found a point on the ceiling and locked onto it, the way his jaw set and his hands went flat against the table. She stayed until his eyes closed. Not unconscious, just the deep, crashing exhaustion of a body that had been pushed to its limit and was now, finally, in a safe enough place to stop pushing. Then she walked out into the facility's main space. Brock was there, just Brock, the others dispersed to their tasks. He looked at her for a moment. "Silas," she said. "What happens now?" Brock's face was flat and certain. "Roman will deal with it when he's out of surgery." "How long?" Doctor said 2 hours minimum. She nodded. "You did good in there," Brock said. The words came out like they'd been extracted from somewhere they didn't usually live. "The transformer. Silas's exit. I just watched the screen," she said. "You called the right things at the right time," Brock said. "That's not nothing." She looked at him. He was not a man who said things. He didn't mean she'd understood that about him. Since the first night, since the gun between her eyes, since the way he'd stood between her and the rest of the room while Roman dealt with the attackers. Brock Serrano was purely functional, and what he was telling her was a functional fact. It didn't make her feel better, exactly. It made her feel something more complicated than better. Because here was what she understood now, standing in the main space of a fortified waterfront facility at somewhere past 4 in the morning, with blood on the sleeve of her coat that wasn't hers. She had not accidentally ended up here. She had made choices, specific choices, one after another, starting with the night she'd aimed a coffee pot at a bleeding man's arm. She could recount every choice. She could tell you exactly why. Each one had seemed reasonable in the moment, and all of them together had led to this room, this night, this blood on her sleeve. She was not a woman who avoided the truth of her situation. It was, in fact, the main thing she had, the ability to look at something clearly. So she looked. She had become something tonight. Not a bystander, not a witness, not a woman who'd been swept up in circumstances beyond her control. She'd sat at those screens and made decisions that had shaped a violent outcome. Men had died in that warehouse. And she didn't know how many, and she was not going to pretend that her actions were separate from those deaths, even if she couldn't have done anything else, even if she'd do it the same way again. She was not separate from this world. She had not been separate from it for some time, maybe since the first night, maybe since the boots, maybe since the moment she put her hand on his face in a destroyed diner and kissed a man whose world was built on things she'd never wanted to touch. Brock was still there. "What does Silas know?" she asked. "About me. Does he know who I am to Roman?" Brock looked at her steadily. He knows you work at the diner. He knew it before tonight. Does he know about tonight? What I did. By morning, Brock said, everyone who matters will know. She took that in. So I can't go back, she said. To the diner. To my apartment. To any of it. Not safely. No, she stood very still. She thought about her apartment, the radiator that sounded like a dying animal, the $412 that had become something else since those first 500s under a coffee mug. She thought about her shift schedule pinned to the refrigerator. She thought about the crossword she'd left on the counter at Marlowe's and whether anyone had thrown it out. She thought about the woman she'd been at 3:14 a.m. On the night 3 blood-soaked men came through the door, tired, cold, counting down the hours. That woman was not exactly gone, but she was somewhere behind tonight now, and the distance between then and now had no road back on it. Okay, she said. Brock said nothing. I need coffee, she said. Real coffee. Not that machine. There's a kitchen in the east wing, Brock said. She walked toward the east wing. She passed the medical room door. She stopped outside it for a moment. She could hear the doctor's voice, low and professional. She could hear nothing from Roman, which meant he was out, or managing it, or both. She put her hand flat on the door for a moment. Then she took it away and walked to the kitchen. She found the coffee. She found a pot. She ran the water. Her hands were steady now, fully steady, the shaking finished, the adrenaline burned through and replaced by something quieter and more permanent. She made the coffee. She sat down at the small table in the corner of the kitchen and wrapped her hands around the mug and thought about what came next. Not emotionally, practically. The way she thought about rent and schedules and broken heaters and the specific calculus of survival. Because that was the kind of thinking that had kept her upright for 30 years. And it was the kind of thinking she needed now. Silas was taken. His organization was fractured. But Roman was in surgery, and his captains were going to gather in the next 24 hours to assess what remained. And some of them were going to see an injured boss as a weakness worth testing. And somewhere in all of that was information. Tessa had information about the battle, about who had done what, about the shape of Silas's operation, and the identity of the people still loyal to him. Information that belonged in Roman's hands when he woke up. She began to organize it in her head. The way she organized a rush at the diner, what came first, what could wait, what was the thing that looked small but was actually the thing that held everything else together. She was still organizing it. Brock appeared in the kitchen doorway 40 minutes later. But he's out of surgery, Brock said. How is he? Doctor says he'll be down for a week, maybe more. Shoulder needs time. The leg is... Brock paused. He's asking for you. She got up. She picked up the coffee. She walked down the corridor toward the medical room and pushed the door open with her shoulder. Roman was propped up, not lying down, because lying down was apparently non-negotiable in the wrong direction for him. His shoulder was dressed properly now, the arm immobilized. His leg was wrapped. He looked like something that had been through something. He looked at her when she came in. You found him, Roman said. His voice was rough with whatever they'd given him. Silas. Brock said you spotted the exit. I was watching the screens, she said. You also, he stopped. Swallowed. Something was costing him in this room, and it wasn't just the injuries. The transformer. That was you. Carver executed it. On your call. He looked at her. Tessa, yes, you saved... He stopped again. Don't, she said, because she could hear where the sentence was going, and she wasn't ready to hold it yet. Don't do that right now. He closed his mouth. She sat down in the chair beside his bed. She set the coffee on the small table nearby. I need to tell you something before you sleep, she said. I'm not sleeping. You are, actually, fairly soon. I can see it. She looked at him directly. The captains are going to hear about tonight. Some of them are going to see an opportunity. I know. I have information they don't. About Silas's operation. About the South team who was running them. Where they staged from. Which vehicles. The thermal footage, the feeds. She paused. I've been doing what I do. Watching and remembering. He was looking at her with that look again. The one that was at the far edge of his range. There's one more thing, she said. What? The captains who delayed getting reinforcements to you tonight, she said. I saw it on the feeds. 2 staging points that should have moved and didn't. For 12 minutes they didn't. Roman was very still. I need you to know, she said, before anything else happens. Before you sleep, before the captains gather. Before any of it. Which two? She told him. He listened. His face did nothing visible, but his right hand, flat on the bed beside him, pressed down once against the surface, hard, and then released. Okay, he said. Okay, she agreed. She picked up the coffee and held it for a moment. Outside this room, the city was doing what it always did, cold and unforgiving, indifferent to the particular weight of what had happened inside any given building on any given night. The sun would come up in a few hours. People would go to work. Diners would open that were not Marlowe's. She would not be going back to any of it. She understood that fully, sitting here, and she was not pretending it didn't cost her anything. It cost her something real. But the woman who'd sat behind that counter, counting down the hours, had been surviving. What she was doing now was something different, something she didn't have a clean word for yet, something that had more risk and more weight, and she was honest enough to admit more life in it than anything she'd felt in a very long time. Go to sleep, she told Roman. You're going to sleep in approximately 4 minutes whether you want to or not, she said. I'll be here when you wake up. He looked at her. I'll be here, she said again, more quietly. He didn't say anything, but something in his face settled the way she'd seen it settle when she'd worn the boots he'd left for her. He'd looked down once and looked away that thing he didn't know how to say out loud, but did anyway, in particular language he had instead of ordinary words. His eyes closed in 3 minutes, not 4. She sat in the chair. She held the coffee. She waited for morning, because morning was when the captains would gather. And when the captains get, she was going to be in the room. Not as the waitress. Not as the woman Roman kept safe in a back room. As the person who had watched everything and remembered all of it, and who was no longer willing to let the shape of what came next be decided by people who had not earned the right to decide it. She was not the same woman who had walked into this facility 8 hours ago. She wasn't sure yet exactly what she was instead. But she was certain of one thing. Whoever came through that door in the morning looking for weakness, they would find her first. And she had never, in 30 years of exhausted, broke, bone-tired survival, once given anyone the blink they were looking for. The captains arrived at 7 in the morning. Not all of them. 4 out of 6, which told its own story about the 2 who hadn't come. And that story was, one Tessa had already started writing in her head during the 3 hours she'd sat in the kitchen, drinking coffee and listening to the facility settle around her into the particular quiet of a place that had been loud recently and was now managing the aftermath. She heard them come in. Voices in the main space, none of them trying to be quiet. The particular volume of men had decided something before they arrived, and were wearing that decision like clothing they'd already put on. She stood up. She rinsed her mug. She set it on the drying rack. She straightened her coat. Then she walked out of the kitchen and into the main space. There were 5 men total, 4 captains, and a 5th she didn't recognize, younger, standing slightly behind the one she'd already identified in her head as the problem. His name was Cutler. She'd heard it once, from Roman, in a sentence that had the particular phrasing of something being explained about a person rather than merely mentioned. Cutler ran the North District operations. He was 40-something, heavy-set in the way that came from muscle that had settled rather than softened. And he had the eyes of a man who had decided what he wanted from this morning and was measuring the distance to it. Carver was in the room. He was at his station, doing something at his screen that was probably real and probably also a reason to keep his eyes busy while the temperature in the room was assessed. Brock was there too, standing near the door to the east wing near the corridor that led to the medical room. Not blocking it, just near it, which was the Brock version of a statement. The 4 captains looked at Tessa when she walked in. Cutler's eyes stayed on her for a beat longer than the others. Not threatening, assessing, the kind of look that was calculating weight and finding the number lower than expected. She was used to that look. She had been used to that look her entire life. It never stopped being useful. "Where is he?" Cutler said. "Recovering," Tessa said. "I need to speak with him. He's out of surgery 4 hours. You can speak with him this afternoon." Cutler looked at her the way men look at a closed door. They haven't decided whether to knock on or kick in. That's not really. Last night, 2 staging positions failed to move for 12 minutes after they were called, Tessa said. Her voice was completely even. Not aggressive, not performing calm, just flat and factual. The voice she used when a customer was complaining about something that was simply not true, and she wasn't going to pretend it was. One of those positions was yours. The room changed. Not loudly. The temperature changed. The way air changes in a building when a window is opened on a cold day, a shift, a recalculation of everything inside. Cutler's face did something she watched carefully. It didn't close down. A guilty man closes down. Cutler's face went through something more complicated, half surprise, half calculation, the expression of a man who had believed himself farther from the light than he apparently was. You were watching the screens, he said. I was watching the screens. You're the waitress. He said it without particular venom, which was somehow worse. Just taxonomic. Putting her in a category. I'm the person Roman left in charge of communications last night, she said. And I'm the person who has thermal footage, exterior surveillance, and radio logs covering every movement from 11 p.m. to 4 a.m., including 12 minutes of nothing from your staging point on the south perimeter. Cutler looked at Brock. Brock looked at the middle distance. The three other captains had arranged themselves in the loose way of people who hadn't fully committed to a side yet, and were watching to see if committing became necessary. One of them, a compact man named Ferris, who Tessa had clocked as the most careful of the group, had his arms crossed and his eyes on Tessa in a way that wasn't hostile. Interested. The way you look at something that's telling you something you need to know. I had a communication gap, Cutler said. My radio. Your radio worked fine at 11:14 and at 11:52, Tessa said. I have both transmissions. The gap was 11:23 to 11:35. Those are the 12 minutes. Cutler's jaw moved. She could see him doing the math, how much she had, how much was usable, whether there was a version of this conversation he could control. There wasn't. She'd made sure of it before she came into this room. Roman needs to hear this, Ferris said. He was talking to Cutler, but his eyes moved to Tessa when he said it, and she understood what he was doing, giving Cutler a way to back down. That wasn't capitulation, while simultaneously telling her that he'd heard her. Roman will hear it this afternoon, Tessa said. All of it. The footage, the logs, and what I saw on the thermal. She paused. So will everyone else in this room. Another silence. Then one of the captains she hadn't spoken to yet, older than the others, gray at the temples, who'd standing slightly apart, made a sound that was almost a laugh. She laid it out before we could, he said, to no one in particular. Sat here all night and laid it all out. His name, she'd learned later, was Ortega. He was the oldest of the active captains, and the one who'd been with Roman's father before he was with Roman, and that history gave him a particular kind of authority in the room that the others deferred to without quite knowing they were doing it. The footage is real? Ortega asked her. And the logs? Yes. He nodded once, looked at Cutler. Then we wait for this afternoon. Cutler's chest rose. He held it. Let it go. He looked at Tessa one more time with the expression of a man who was not done with this conversation, but had decided to have it somewhere else, at another time, in conditions more favorable to him. Fine, he said. He sat down. Tessa walked to the communication station and sat down next to Carver, who moved his coffee mug approximately 1 inch to give her room without saying a word or looking at her. She appreciated him enormously. The next 4 hours were a particular kind of tension, the sustained, low-frequency kind that wears at a person differently than acute fear. Acute fear burns fast and then it's done. This was the kind that settled into muscle and jaw and the space between the shoulder blades and stayed there. The captains waited. They talked among themselves in the way people talk when they're managing information in fragments, with pauses, with eyes that moved around the room while mouths were speaking to specific people. Cutler made 2 phone calls and tried to make a third before Brock crossed the room and said, very quietly, that outgoing calls were restricted until Roman had been briefed, which was a thing that had apparently just become policy in the last 90 seconds, but that nobody in the room wanted to test. Carver worked his screens. He pulled the logs Tessa had told him to pull, organized the footage chronologically, put together a sequential file that was comprehensive, and organized the way a clear argument is organized, everything in order. Nothing missing, nothing that required explanation because the sequence explained itself. He did this without being asked to, which was, she thought, the most professional thing she'd witnessed in a long time. You've done this before, she told him quietly. Prepared evidence. I've worked for Roman for 9 years, Carver said, and before that for his father for 6. He glanced at her. This organization runs on information. Always has. What changes is who has it. She looked at him. You have it right now, he said, and went back to his screen. At 11:40, Brock came out of the east wing and crossed to her. He's awake, Brock said, and coherent, more or less. Which is it? More. She stood. The footage and logs? Carver's sending it to the room. And Cutler. He knows he's on the clock, Brock said. He'll be in that room wearing his best face. Whatever else he is, Cutler is not stupid. She nodded. She walked to the east wing. Roman was sitting up when she came in, which was an improvement from 4 hours ago, but not the improvement he was probably trying to project. His color was wrong, too pale in some places, too concentrated in others, the particular mottled look of a body managing damage while insisting on function. His shoulder was properly immobilized now, the arm in a proper sling. His leg was elevated on the bed's adjusted frame. He had somehow put a clean shirt on. She noticed this, and it told her everything about him she already knew. You look terrible, she said. I feel worse, he said. Sit down. I'm fine standing, Tessa. He said her name with a specific weight. Sit down, she sat. He looked at her for a moment. The cook was assessing, but not the cold kind, the kind that was looking for something specific and checking whether it was there. You held the room this morning, he said. Carver held the room. I just talked. Brock said you put Cutler down in under 2 minutes. I gave him information. What he did with it was his choice. Roman looked at her with that look, the one at the far edge of his range. The excavated one. The 2 captains who didn't come, he said. Tell me what you think. I think they're waiting to see which way this lands, she said. They're not committed to Cutler or to you. They're committed to whoever looks most stable in 48 hours. Yes, which means this meeting matters. Yes. He shifted, and his jaw tightened for a half second before he locked it down. The shoulder. What do you have? She told him. Everything. In sequence, the way Carver had organized the files, but she told it rather than reading it, because she'd remembered it, and telling was faster and cleaner. Thermal positions, radio logs. The 12 minutes. The South team's staging point. The 2 captains who'd been slow. The shape of Silas's operation as she'd read it from the screens. Roman listened without interrupting, which was, she'd come to understand, the highest form of attention he was capable of. When other people spoke, he managed the conversation. When Tessa spoke, he listened. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. The footage shows all of this, he said. Carver has it organized. It's in the room. And Cutler, he knows what you have, she said. He's going to walk in there and try to give you a version of those 12 minutes that you can accept. Because he needs to know if you're going to accept it. Am I? She looked at him directly. That's your decision. He looked at the far wall for a moment. What would you do? I'd find out why he waited, she said. Because there are 2 reasons a man stalls for 12 minutes. Either he was genuinely trying to reach Silas's people first, which is treason, or he was watching to see if Silas could win, which is cowardice. Those need different responses. Roman looked at her. And I'd want him to tell me which one, she said. In that room, in front of the others. Because whatever he says will tell you more about the other men in the room than it tells you about him. Another silence. You should be in there, Roman said. I know. Carver will set you a position. I already asked him. Roman made the sound again, the almost law, that cost him in the shoulder and that he couldn't fully stop. Of course you did. He moved to stand. She was up before he'd finished the mention, one hand under his right arm, steadying without taking the weight, because he needed to take the weight himself or the room would see it. He looked at her. Don't say thank you, she said. I wasn't going to. Good. She adjusted her grip. Ready? No, he said. Let's go. The main space had been rearranged while she was in the medical room. The captains were seated at the long table that had been pulled from the side wall to the center. Carver's doing, she guessed, because the positioning of bodies at a table changes the dynamics of a conversation, and Carver was 9 years deep in understanding that. When Roman walked in, supported by Brock on his left and nobody on his right, because the sit side was how you read a leader's unimpaired arm, the room went through a recalibration. She watched them do it, the 4 captains, adjusting their assessment of him, measuring the damage against the fact of his presence. Cutler's face stayed controlled. Ortega's face did something quiet and satisfied. Ferris looked at Roman and then at Tessa, in that order, which told her something about where his mind had been this morning. Tessa sat at the far end of the table, to Roman's right, which was the position that was present without being central. She'd thought about where to sit for 30 seconds. While Roman was finishing getting dressed and she'd arrived at this, central was claiming too much. Absent was giving too much away. She needed to be where he could see her and where the others couldn't quite dismiss her. The table worked. Roman sat. He did not arrange himself to hide the arm or the leg. He let both be visible, which was deliberate, showing damage. You're not hiding is different from showing weakness. Last night, Roman said, without preamble, we took out Silas Merrick and his operation. 2 of our men are in medical. Silas is in custody. He paused. And we have a problem that needs addressing before anything else happens. He looked at Cutler. Cutler met his eyes, did not look away. Your staging point didn't move for 12 minutes, Roman said. Tell me why. The room was very still. Cutler's hands were flat on the table. He'd chosen, Tessa noted, the posture of a man presenting himself as open, rather than defensive hands visible, shoulders back, no crossing of arms. He'd thought about this, too. I had contact from Silas's people 2 days ago, Cutler said. Nobody moved. They reached out through a third party, an old contact from before my time with the organization. He was looking at Roman, not the room. They told me Roman was going to move on Silas, and that when it happened, I should stand back. Let it play out. And you didn't tell me, Roman said. I didn't tell you, Cutler said, because I hadn't decided what to do yet. In 12 minutes. In 12 minutes. He held Roman's gaze. I want to be honest with you. I sat there for 12 minutes, and I thought about it. Both ways. What happened if Silas won? What happened if you won? What happened to my people either way? And, Roman said. And I moved, Cutler said. I moved and I sent everything I had toward your position, which is in your logs if you want to pull them, and 3 of my men took hits getting there. He paused. I chose you. I chose this organization. But I made you wait 12 minutes to do it, and I'm telling you that directly, because if you're going to make a decision about it, you should make it on what actually happened. The room was so quiet, Tessa could hear the building's ventilation. She was watching Roman. His face was doing the thing it did when he was running something very fast, through a very particular kind of analysis, not emotional, not personal, the flat-eyed accounting of a man who had learned to separate what he felt about a thing from what the thing actually was. Silas's contact, Roman said. The third party. Name's Whitmore. He runs a freight operation out of the South Port. He's been Silas's outside channel for at least 2 years. I recognized the name when he made contact. I should have told you then. Cutler's jaw moved. That's the second thing I should have told you. Yes, Roman said. It is. Another silence. What do you want me to do? Cutler said. And something in the way he said it, stripped of performance, just the direct question changed the temperature in the room again. Roman looked at him for a long moment. Whitmore, he said. You're going to give Kevin Carver everything you have on his operation. Today, yes. In the 12 minutes, Roman said. I know about them. Every captain in this room knows about them now. That knowledge is the consequence. He paused. What I want to know is whether I'm done being surprised by what you don't tell me. Cutler met his eyes. Yes, I'm going to hold you to that, Roman said. Personally. Cutler nodded. Once. The nod of a man who understood that the conversation was over, and that he had come out of it with things still intact that he had been genuinely unsure he'd keep. Tessa let out a slow breath through her nose and made sure nobody saw it. Ortega was the one who spoke next. He looked at Roman with the direct, unhurried manner of a man who had been in more rooms like this than everyone else combined. Silas had inside access, Ortega said. Garrett, and probably others we haven't found yet. You've got holes that need closing. I know. The captains who didn't come this morning, Ortega said. Decker and Voss. I know, Roman said again. Decker I'd watch. Voss I'd move on. Ortega said it without any particular affect. But that's your call. It is, Roman agreed. Ferris leaned forward slightly. He'd been so quiet for so long that the movement drew everyone's attention. What about the organization's structure, he said. Silas held a significant portion of the operating territory. That territory is now who has it. For now, nobody, Roman said. It stays dark until I've assessed what's viable and what isn't. Some of it's viable, Ferris said. If it sits too long, it sits, Roman said, until I've assessed it. Ferris sat back. He wasn't happy. But he accepted it, which told Tessa that Ferris's ambition was the kind that calculated rather than pushed. The meeting went for another 40 minutes. She didn't speak during most of it. She listened. She watched faces and hands, and the particular way men moved in their chairs when something was said that they hadn't expected, the micro-adjustments, the recalibrations. She was building a map in her head. Who was reliable, who was managed, who was the kind of uncertain that tipped one way or another based on outcome, who was calculating something she couldn't see yet. When the captains began to leave Ortega first, in the manner of a man who left when business was done, and not a minute after she remained seated, Cutler was last. He stopped at the door and looked back at Roman. The waitress, he said, not derogatory, just locating her. She knew about the 12 minutes before you walked in. Yes, Roman said. She had it organized before the meeting. Yes. Cutler looked at Tessa. Something in his face was working through a recalculation. What's her position, he asked. Roman opened his mouth. I don't have one, Tessa said before he could answer. I watched screens last night because no one else was available. Today I sat in a meeting because Roman asked me to. Tomorrow I don't know yet. She looked at Cutler steadily. But I'd suggest everyone in this organization get comfortable with me being in rooms. Cutler looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. It was the specific nod of a man filing information correctly. He left. Brock closed the door behind him. The room was empty except for Roman, Tessa, and Brock, and the accumulated weight of the last 18 hours that sat in it like furniture. Roman looked at her. He was gray with exhaustion and managing the shoulder and the leg with the particular focused energy of a man who would not stop managing them until he was alone. You could have let me answer him, he said. I know, she said. Why didn't you? Because whatever you said would define me as a function of you. Once, she said. In a room full of men who are deciding what I am. That's the wrong framing. He looked at her. I'm not a position, she said. I'm not a title. Right now I'm a person who has information they all need, and who they can't quite categorize. And that's more useful than any title you could give me. A long pause. You've been thinking about organizational dynamics, he said. I've been managing the needs of 8 tables at once for 7 years, she said. It's the same thing. He made the sound the almost law, the one that cost him, and then his face changed. And the thing he'd been holding since he walked out of the medical room, the particular way he'd been holding his body against the pain and the exhaustion and the weight of what had just happened in this room, that thing began, just slightly, to come down. Sit down, she said. I'm fine, Roman. He sat. Brock materialized with 2 mugs of coffee that Tessa hadn't seen him make and set them on the table and then became very interested in something at the far side of the room. She pushed 1 mug toward Roman. He wrapped his hand around it the way he always wrapped his hand around a coffee mug, right hand, the undamaged one curling around the ceramic with the kind of grip that was looking for something solid. She drank her own. Decker and Voss, she said. The 2 who didn't come. I know. Voss has a financial interest in 3 of Silas's operating territories, she said. I heard Silas's name come up in the logs twice last night, outgoing calls from a relay that Carver thinks traces back to the Halverson block area. The timing matches Voss's known pattern of Tessa. Roman set down his mug. Stop. She stopped. You've been awake for... He looked at her. When did you last sleep? I'm fine. That's not what I asked. Yesterday morning, she said, before my shift. He looked at her with an expression that was not quite exasperation and not quite something else, but lived in the territory between. The Voss information will still be true in 6 hours, he said. I know. So will the Decker problem. And Whitmore. And the territorial question. He picked his mug back up. None of it disappears if you sleep. It might move. Brock will watch it move, he said. Brock. Without looking away from her. Yeah, Brock said from across the room. You'll watch it. I'll watch it. Roman looked at Tessa. She looked at him. She was 30 years old, and she had been awake for somewhere between 22 and 24 hours. And she had spent most of those hours in a state of sustained adrenaline and careful attention, and the particular muscular exhaustion of someone who has been very, very still for a very long time while managing a great deal. She was tired. She was deeply, structurally tired, the kind that settled into the back of the skull and the base of the spine, and made the edges of things slightly soft. The room's in the East Wing, Roman said. Carver will. I know where they are, she said. I know you know. She drank the rest of her coffee. She set the mug down. 2 hours, she said. 6:35. 4, she said. And that's final. Done, he said. Something in his face had settled again, the way it settled sometimes, when she did a thing that surprised him by being exactly what he needed. Tessa. She was already standing. Thank you, he said. She looked at him. You said not to say it, he said. I'm saying it anyway. She picked up her mug and his empty one and set them on the counter by the kitchen door. Get some sleep yourself, she said. You look worse than I feel. She walked down the east wing corridor and found the third door, which was unlocked, and inside it a cot and a blanket and a window that showed gray morning sky through frosted glass. She sat on the edge of the cot and pulled her boots off, set them side by side on the floor, the good winter ones that had shown up in a box 3 months ago without a note. She lay back and pulled the blanket over herself. The ceiling was bare concrete. The light through the window was the flat, non-committal gray of a winter morning that hadn't decided what kind of day it was going to be yet. She closed her eyes. She had, in the last 18 hours, identified a traitor, spotted an ambush, directed a tactical response to save the life of a man who ran a criminal empire, sat in a room of dangerous men, and held her ground, and survived a morning meeting that had the potential to go in any of several very bad directions. She had also not had anything to eat since the previous afternoon, and she was cold in a way that went past the facility's temperature, a cold from the inside that would need more than a blanket. She thought about Marlowe's. The particular quality of warmth that the heater behind the counter put out when it was working, the narrow band of it that caught the back of her right shoulder if she stood in exactly the right place. She thought about her apartment, the radiator sound, the crossword on the table. She thought about the moment she'd said, to no one in particular, this doesn't mean anything, and put on the boots anyway. She thought about what it meant that she was lying in a room in a fortified waterfront facility with blood on the sleeve of her coat and the organizational intelligence of a criminal syndicate in her head, and that none of it, not one piece of it, felt as foreign as she'd expected it to feel. She slept. She woke up in 3 hours and 40 minutes because something had changed in the sounds of the building, a different quality of movement, a different urgency in the voices carrying through the concrete walls. And Tessa Rowan had spent 7 years sleeping light in an apartment where the neighbors were unpredictable, and she'd learned to wake fast, no lag, just open-eyed and present. She was pulling her boots on before she was fully aware of why. She heard Brock's voice, short, clipped, the register he used when something had moved faster than expected. She opened the door. Brock was in the corridor. What? She said. Voss, Brock said. He's on the move. His whole team, vehicles, Brock's jaw set. He's heading for the facility. Tessa went cold. He knows where we are. He's known for 6 months, Brock said. He's one of the 7 people Roman told about this place when he set it up. His eyes were flat and certain. And now he's coming here, armed. How long? 20 minutes, maybe less. She looked at the corridor. At the door at the end of it, behind which Roman was in a medical room with a shoulder that had been in surgery 4 hours ago, and a leg that was... Roman can't fight, she said. No. Can you evacuate him? We'd be moving him into Voss's approach window. Brock's voice was the voice of a man laying out facts he did not like. If we move in the next 8 minutes, we might clear it. If we wait longer, what's the facility's defensive capacity? 6 armed, plus Carver and me, against Voss's team? He's bringing at least 12. Tessa stood in the corridor in her 3 hours worn clothes with her boots on and her brain doing the thing it had been doing. Since last night, the diner section management, the triage, the witch tables about to tip over. Get Roman moving, she said, now. I don't care about the window. You move him, and you get him out the north exit and into whatever vehicle is fastest, and you go. That leaves the facility. I know what it leaves. She was already walking toward the main space. I need Carver, and I need that communication system. Tessa Brock, she stopped and looked at him over her shoulder. Get him out. Brock looked at her for 1 full second. Then he turned and went to the medical room. She walked into the main space. Carver was at his station. The screens were showing exterior feeds, and there, on the road, she could see the vehicles. 2 of them visible, moving in the particular way that was not casual. She sat down. Talk to me, she said to Carver. 12 confirmed in the vehicles, Carver said. His voice was controlled but tight at the edges. 2 more might be staged at the south approach. I can't confirm. Who do we have that can reach the south side captains? Right now, directly? Ortega has a direct line that doesn't go through the main relay. Get him. She was looking at the screens. And get Ferris. Not Cutler, she thought. Actually, get Cutler too. Carver looked at her. Get all 3, she said, and tell them that Voss is making a move on the facility right now, with Roman in medical, and that this is the moment where they decide who they are. Carver held her gaze for 1 second. Then he pulled his headset on and started dialing. She watched the screens. The vehicles were 4 minutes out. Behind her, through the walls, she heard the specific sound of the East Wing's rear access, opening Brock, moving Roman. Her whole chest compressed once, just once, and then she made it stop and looked at the screens. Carver was talking fast into the headset. She could hear fragments. She couldn't tell from the fragments which way it was going. The facility's 6 armed people were positioning. She could see 2 of them on the exterior feeds, moving to the perimeter. The others were somewhere inside, preparing for a defensive configuration that was mathematically not going to be sufficient against 12. She knew this. Carver knew it. The 6 armed people knew it. What none of them knew, yet, was whether the phone calls Carver was making right now were going to matter. She watched the vehicles get closer on the feed. 3 minutes. Carver's voice in the headset, still talking. 2 minutes. The vehicles slowed at the facility's outer approach. Not stopped, slowed. Assessing Voss wasn't rushing. He thought he had time. She watched the screen, and then her phone, the one Carver had handed her that morning, because Roman's people communicated through encrypted channels, and she was now on those channels, whether any of them had formally agreed to that or not. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. A text from a number Carver had labeled in the contacts as Ortega. 2 words. She stared at them. Then she looked at the exterior feed, where the 2 vehicles had stopped completely, 50 yards from the facility gate. Carver, she said. He pulled the headset partway off. Check the south approach, she said. He looked at his screens. His face did the thing it did when something unexpected arrived, a loosening, very brief, before the professionalism settled back over it. There are vehicles on the south approach, he said slowly, coming in fast. They're not, he looked at her. They're not Voss's people. No, she said. She turned the phone so Carver could see the screen. Ortega's text. 2 words were coming. On the exterior feed, Voss's vehicles hadn't moved. From inside them, Voss could now see what she could see: vehicles approaching from the south, more than he'd planned for, moving with the kind of deliberate speed that announced they weren't looking for a negotiation. Voss had made his calculation. He'd decided that a facility with 6 defenders and an injured boss was a window he could step through. He hadn't calculated for a woman who had been awake most of the night, reading screens and making phone calls and building, in her head, the map of who in this organization could be called on and what they needed to hear to move. She watched the feed. Voss's vehicles sat for 40 seconds. Then they turned around. She watched them go. She set the phone down on the desk and put both hands flat and leaned on them and breathed. He's gone, Carver said. For now, she said. Yes, Carver said. For now. She straightened up. She looked at the screens, all of them, the full sweep, left to right, top to bottom. The south approach, where Ortega's vehicles were slowing at the gate. The empty road where Voss's vehicles had been. The facility's exterior, quiet, cold. The February light flat on the concrete and the chain link. Everything was still. She picked up her phone. She typed back to Ortega. Thank you. His response came in 20 seconds. Tell Roman he owes me a decent dinner. She almost laughed. She genuinely almost laughed. Standing in a fortified waterfront facility, having just watched a coup attempt turn around at a gate, and the thing that almost broke through was the absurdity of Ortega's request, delivered in exactly the same flat practicality with which everything in this world operated. She was going to have to think about that, about the fact that she'd almost laughed, about what that meant. Later, though, her phone buzzed again. Different number. Carver had labeled it Brock. She answered. We're clear, Brock said. He's in the vehicle. We're 20 minutes out. Voss turned back, she said. Ortega came through. A pause. How did you reach Ortega that fast? Brock asked. He gave me his direct number this morning, she said, when he left the meeting. Another pause. Longer. He gave you his direct number, Brock said. Yes. Ortega has had that number for 11 years, and he gives it to about 6 people. I know, she said. He told me the silence on the line had a specific quality, the quality of a man revising a significant number of calculations simultaneously. We're coming back, Brock said. I know, she said. I'll have coffee ready. She hung up. She looked at Carver. Carver looked at her. The machine in the corner, she said. Still terrible, he said. Yes, she said. But it's what we have. She crossed to it. She found the coffee. She started it running. Outside, Ortega's vehicles were pulling into the south lot. She could hear voices, new voices, the relief of people who had moved fast and arrived to find the thing they'd moved for already resolved. Inside, the facility's hum resumed its normal register, the background frequency of a place that was functional, that was operational, that was against a number of significant odds, still standing. She poured the first mug and held it in both hands. Her hands were completely steady. She noticed this. She filed it next to other things she'd noticed about herself. In the last 18 hours, the things she could do. The things she hadn't known she could do. The specific shape of what she apparently was, when the pressure was high enough to show it. The door from the east wing opened. She turned. Roman stood in the doorway. Brock hadn't come back yet. He'd come back on his own, which was insane, which was completely and entirely predictable. He was gray, and his leg was wrong, and his arm was in its sling, and he was looking at her with an expression she didn't have a name for yet, something that lived past the edge of everything she'd seen on his face before. You were supposed to stay in the vehicle, she said. Brock's parking, he said. You walked from Tessa. He said her name the way he says it when he needed her to stop talking and hear something. Voss just turned around. Yes, because Ortega came. Yes. Ortega came because you called him. Yes. He looked at her from across the room, from across the distance of everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. The diner, the facility, the surgery, the captains, the screens, the thermal footage, the phone calls, the 12 minutes, the drainage trench, the transformer, the kiss in the ruins of Marlowe's before the sirens closed in. Tessa, he said. Don't, she said. I'm going to. Roman, you just stopped a coup, he said, while I was in a car, while my shoulder was in a sling. He paused. While you'd been awake for going on 24 hours with no food and terrible coffee. She looked at him. I don't know what to do with you, he said. And it wasn't complaint, and it wasn't defeat, and it wasn't even exactly wonder, though it had something of all three in it. I have been in this world my entire life, and I do not know what to do with you. You could start, she said, by sitting down before you fall down. He crossed the room, slowly, because the leg, because the shoulder, because the surgery 4 hours ago, and the walk from wherever Brock had stopped the car. He crossed the room, and he sat on the stool nearest the communications desk, and she handed him the coffee mug she'd poured. He wrapped his right hand around it. She poured herself another from the machine. They sat. The facility hummed. Outside, Ortega's people were talking in the south lot. Somewhere in the building, Carver was already on the next thing. Voss was somewhere in the city, recalculating. Decker was somewhere, making decisions she'd have to understand before tomorrow. There was more. There was always more. But right now, in this moment, it was just the two of them, and the terrible coffee, and the particular silence of people who had been through something, and come out the other side, and didn't need to narrate it to each other, because they'd both been there. Roman, she said. Yeah, when this is settled. When Voss is handled and Decker is handled, and whatever comes after that is handled. She looked at the mug in her hands. I want to talk about Marlowe's. He went still. Not now, she said. Later. When you're not in a sling. Okay, he said. I have an idea, she said. He looked at her. About what comes next, she said. For both of us. He held her gaze. Tell me, he said. Later, she said. Drink your coffee first. He drank the coffee. Outside the city was cold and indifferent and ongoing. And inside the facility, something shifted in the way that things shift when a critical mass has been reached, not with noise, not with announcement, but with the quiet certainty of a thing that has been decided even if the deciding hasn't finished yet. Tessa held her mug. She looked at the screens. She was not the woman who had walked into this facility 20 hours ago. She was not the woman who had stood behind a diner counter at 314A, counting hours. She was not entirely sure yet who she was instead, but she could feel the shape of it, not fragile, not borrowed, not contingent on him or on any of this. Something her own, something she'd made out of exhaustion and stubbornness, and a coffee pot held over an open wound, one impossible night at a time. She watched the screens. She drank her coffee. She waited for what came next. Voss didn't make them wait long. 3 days. That was how much time passed between his vehicles turning around at the facility gate and the moment he decided that waiting was worse than moving. 3 days during which Roman sat in the medical room, and then the main space, and then, on the third day, insisted on a chair at the table, like a man who had decided that recovery was something that happened around the work rather than before it. 3 days during which Tessa slept in the East Wing room, and ate food that Carver's people brought in, and watched the screens with the focused attention of someone who had learned, in approximately 18 hours, that watching screens was a thing she was genuinely built for. She watched Voss through the cameras, through the city surveillance feeds that Carver had access to, through channels she didn't ask about, through the reports that came in from Ortega's people, who had apparently decided, after the morning, they'd driven fast to a facility and found a coup already disbanded, that Tessa was worth reporting to directly. She hadn't asked for that either. It had just happened. The way things happened in this world, not through assignment, but through demonstrated reliability, the organizational equivalent of the boots appearing in a box. Someone decided you were worth the information and started giving it to you. Voss was reorganizing, pulling in resources from his territory, consolidating, making the specific moves of a man who had missed his window and was deciding whether a second window was available or whether the calculus had changed too completely. She tracked it. She brought it to Roman every evening, organized and sequential, and Roman listened and said very little, which meant he was doing his own tracking and checking hers against it. On the third evening, he said, "He's going to move on Whitmore." She looked up. Why Whitmore? "Because Whitmore is the last loose connection to Silas that isn't already handled," Roman said. "And Voss knows we have Whitmore's name. If Whitmore talks, Voss loses his cover for the last 6 months," she said. Yes. She thought about this. How long does Whitmore have? If Voss decides tonight? Maybe 12 hours. Does Whitmore know? Whitmore doesn't know anything yet, Roman said. He thinks this is still a situation he can negotiate his way through. Can he? Roman looked at her. He gave Silas access to my organization for 2 years. He was the outside channel for every communication that cost me people and money, and he stopped. His jaw moved. No, he can't negotiate his way through. But if he talks first, she said. If Whitmore comes to you before Voss reaches him. Roman was quiet. That's what Voss is afraid of, she said. That's why he has to move fast. Because if Whitmore decides that talking to you is better than whatever Voss is offering, then Voss is exposed completely, Roman said. So reach Whitmore first, she said. Roman looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Brock. Brock was already moving. They reached Whitmore at 11 p. Tessa was not in the room for that conversation. She was at the screens, watching the exterior feeds, watching for Voss's vehicles. And the 40 minutes that Brock and 2 of Ortega's people spent with Whitmore in a back office of his freight operation were 40 minutes she measured in the rhythm of her own breathing and the movement of the clock on Carver's screen. At 11:43, Brock called. He's talking, Brock said. Everything? Everything. Silas, Voss, the outside channels. Names, dates, amounts. A pause, he had documentation. He kept documentation on everything, apparently, as personal insurance. Of course he did, she said. He's handing it over. She set the phone down and looked at Carver. Carver looked back at her with the expression he'd been wearing for 3 days, the one that had started as assessment, and had settled into something she'd describe as collegial, if she were being precise about it. It's enough? Carver asked. It's enough, she said. Voss's vehicles appeared on the south approach feed at 12:17 a.m. heading for Whitmore's freight operation. They were too late by 93 minutes, which they didn't know yet. Tessa watched them arrive, watched them stop, watched the particular body language of men who had arrived to do something and found the something already done, the clustered consultation, the phone calls, the reconfiguration of a plan that no longer fit the situation. She picked up her phone and called Ortega. He's at Whitmore's, she said. He's finding out right now that Whitmore talked. He's going to run or he's going to consolidate somewhere and wait for his next option. He won't run, Ortega said. His voice was the voice of a man who had known Voss for a long time. He's not built for running. He'll go to ground somewhere he thinks is safe and try to negotiate from there. Where? A pause. He has a building on the east waterfront. Not registered to him, it's registered to a shell through a holding company. Old. He used it during the Merrick years when he and Silas were still. Ortega stopped. Something in his silence told her he was weighing something when they were still aligned. You knew, she said, that Voss and Silas were aligned. The silence this time was different. Not everything I know, Ortega said carefully, is mine to say before I understand what it means. She held the phone. She thought about about Ortega, who had been in this world since before Roman's father died, who had seen everything and said exactly what he judged to be necessary and nothing more, who had given her his direct number on the first morning. You were watching, she said. All of it. You were watching to see how it landed. I'm old, Ortega said. I watch things land before I decide what they mean. And now you're telling me about the East Waterfront building. Now I'm telling you. He said yes. She understood. This was not the place to say everything she understood about it. But she understood. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet, Ortega said. Voss is not a man who accepts a corner gracefully, she told Roman. He was at the table, Brock beside him. When she walked in and gave them the East Waterfront location and Ortega's assessment, Roman listened. Brock listened. Something passed between them in the way things passed between two men who had worked together long enough to communicate in the spaces between sentences. Tonight, Roman said. Tonight, Brock said. I need 6. Already on it. Roman looked at his arm, at the sling, at the particular way his body was currently arranged, around the things that were healing and the things still healing and the things that would need longer. You're not going, Tessa said. He looked at her. You physically cannot. I know, he said. She stopped. I know, he said again, quieter. I'm not going. He held her gaze. Brock will handle it. This was, she understood, genuinely difficult for him. Not the admitting Roman was not a man who lied to himself about his physical state. She'd come to understand that. The difficulty was the handing off, the act of trusting something this final to someone else's hands. Brock will handle it, she said, not to convince him, just to say it back to him, so he'd heard it in a voice that wasn't his own. He nodded. Once, Brock left with 6 men at 1:15 a.m. Tessa and Roman sat in the main space. She was at the screens. He was at the table with documents he wasn't reading. The facility was quiet in the specific way. It was quiet when the people who filled it with functional noise were gone, and what remained was the infrastructure, the hum, the ventilation. Carver, at his station, doing the slow, careful work of tying off the last of the communications threads that led back to Silas and Voss and Garrett and Whitmore. 40 minutes. Then Brock's voice on the radio, short and final. Done, he said. Nobody hurt. A pause. Voss is handled. He's not going to be a problem. She looked at Roman. Roman looked at the table. He stayed very still for a moment, the way he went still when something was over, and the machinery that had been running at full load was allowed to begin, gradually, to slow. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. The documents on the table stayed where they were. The screen cycled through theirs. The city outside of the city cold, indifferent, carrying on with the specific ongoing quality of large things that don't stop for specific events. After a while, Roman said, You mentioned Marlowe's. I did. You said you had an idea. She looked at him. You're asking now? At 2 a.m. after. I've had 3 days to think about it, he said. I'd like to know what the idea is. She looked at the screens, then at him. It's gone, she said. Marlowe's, whatever happens next, it's done. The building, the shifts, she paused. That version of my life is done. Yes, he said. He was watching her face. But the property is something, she said. The building, the lot next door that's been empty since I've worked there. If someone were to buy both. Someone, he said. Someone, she agreed. And deed them to me, which would be a thing that person couldn't do without my knowing about it. Unlike boots and space heaters. Tessa, I'm making a point. You're making several. If someone were to do that, she said, with legitimate money, no organizational connection, clean title, I could build something. A real restaurant. Not a diner, not Marlowe's, something mine. She paused. For the people who need it. Nurses and truck drivers and factory workers and anyone else stuck between midnight and morning with nowhere to sit. Roman was quiet. I know how to run a service, she said. I know how to manage a staff and a budget and a difficult customer at 4A. I know what the overnight people need and what they don't get and what they'd come back for. She looked at him. I've been doing it for 7 years in a building I didn't own. I'd like to do it in one I do. Roman was looking at her with the look again. The far edge one. And you, she said. I'm not going to pretend you're not part of this conversation. What you do next, the organization, the legitimate businesses you said you wanted to separate from the rest, that's your work, not mine. I'll help you think through it if you want, but I'm not running it, and I'm not embedded in it. I know, he said. We're two different operations, she said. That's not negotiable. I know that too, he said. Good. She looked at the screens, then back at him. Do you want to know what I'm going to call it? Yes. Rowan's Night Kitchen, she said. He was quiet for a moment. After you, he said. After me, she said. My name. On the door. On the building. A pause. Mine. Roman looked at her for a long moment, the full weight of it, the accumulated meaning of what she was describing, which was not only a restaurant but a flag planted in ground she'd earned, a statement made in brick and mortar about who she was and who she'd decided to be. Tell me what you need, he said. I need the deed in my name, she said. Both properties. Clean. Done. I need a lawyer who isn't connected to anything that could come back on it. Carver knows someone, Roman said. Fully independent. I need to be involved in every step, she said. Not handed a finished thing. Involved. Yes, he said. And he meant it. She could hear that he meant it. The specific quality of agreement from a man who understood exactly what she was asking for and why. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. They sat in the quiet. After a while, she said, the thing with Derek. Roman looked at her. She hadn't told him the full story. She'd told him pieces over weeks of nights in the diner. The way you tell someone pieces of a thing when you're not ready to tell them the whole thing, but you're testing, gradually, whether the whole thing would be safe in their hands. Derek Holloway. 7 years of her life. The specific and particular degradation of being with someone who was always, in some fundamental way, managing you, shrinking you, making you the smaller version of yourself, because the smaller version was easier to stay above. She'd left. That part she'd never doubted. Leaving had been the clear part. The unclear part was the 7 years before the leaving, and what it meant that she'd stayed, and whether that said something about her she hadn't finished understanding. He came into Marlowe's, she said, about a year before the night you came in, with people, friends, colleagues, whatever they were. She looked at the screens without seeing them. He took a photograph of me, held it up for them to see, said something about what settling looks like. She paused. The whole diner heard it. Nobody said anything. Roman said nothing. He was listening with the full quality of his attention, the kind that didn't move. I didn't do anything, she said. That's the part I've thought about since. I had a coffee pot in my hand, and I stood there, and I didn't do anything. I waited for him to leave, and then I went back to rolling silverware, and I told myself it didn't matter. She paused. It mattered. Yes, Roman said. I think about that sometimes, she said. About the difference between that moment and the moment I held the pot over your arm. She looked at him. You were more dangerous than he was, by any objective measure. Yes, Roman said. But I wasn't afraid of you, she said. Not like that. Not the way I was afraid of him. She thought about how to say the next part. Derek never hit me. He never did anything that looked like the thing people look for. He just arranged things, so that I was always a little off balance, always a little dependent on his version of what was true. Roman's right hand, flat on the table, pressed down once. I think I wasn't afraid of you, she said, because you were honest about what you were. You didn't pretend to be something safer. You were dangerous and you said so, and you... She paused. You made room for me to be the thing I was, which was not small and not manageable, and you never once tried to make me smaller. Roman looked at her for a long time. Derek saw the photograph, she said. Online, eventually. Of you and me. Together, she'd seen it too. Someone had caught them outside the facility. A long-lens photograph, posted on one of the city's gossip-adjacent news sites. She'd looked at it for a while. I don't know if he understood who you were when he saw it, but I know he saw it. And I know that whatever he thought when he saw it, it's the last thing he has any power to think about me. Good, Roman said. I didn't do it for him, she said. I want to be clear about that. Nothing I've done since that first night was about him. I know, Roman said. She paused. I wanted to say it out loud, that part is closed. That chapter. She looked at Roman. All of it. He nodded. And that was enough. That was all she needed to say, and all she needed from him was the nod. And he gave it to her. And the thing closed the way things close when they're genuinely finished, not with drama, not with fanfare, but with the quiet, specific click of a door shutting on a room you've cleaned out. She looked at the screens. He looked at his documents. They sat and the city went on outside, and the facility hummed, and somewhere in the East Wing Carver was tying off the last of the threads. The next weeks were not simple. She said that to herself, often, in the days that followed, as a kind of calibration. Not simple, not clean, not the version of Aftermath where things resolve into clarity, and everyone knows what they are and what comes next. Silas was in custody. What that meant in Roman's world was not the same as what it meant in the world of courts and prosecutors, and she asked Roman once, directly, and he told her directly, and she sat with what he told her and didn't ask again. Some things were true regardless of whether she wanted them to be true. She was not naive about the world she was standing in. She had chosen to stand in it with the full knowledge of what it contained. What she chose to do with that knowledge was her own. Decker, the captain, who hadn't come to the morning meeting and hadn't come when Ortega called, disappeared from the city within 72 hours of Voss being handled. Roman told her this with the particular flat affect that meant he knew more than he was saying about how it had happened, and she received it with the same flat affect, and they moved on. Whitmore's documentation took 3 weeks to fully process. By the end of it, Roman had the complete shape of what Silas had built. Over 2 years inside the organization, every channel, every compromised contact, every financial thread. He dismantled it methodically. The way you take apart something that's been built badly and that you can't leave standing. Some of what he found in the dismantlings surprised even him. Some of it, she thought, hurt him in a way he wouldn't say directly, because it involved people he trusted, and trust, for Roman, was not given cheaply and was not lost cheaply. She was there for some of those evenings, not to advise, just to be in the room. She'd learned, over months of shared silence in Marlowe's, that sometimes being in the room was the thing, and that Roman was one of those people who could only fully put something down if there was someone nearby worth putting it down in front of. She was that person. She'd accepted that. It was not a small thing. She held it accordingly. The building came first. Roman's lawyer Carver's contact, fully independent, a woman in her 50s named Pellegrini who looked at Tessa across a conference table with the assessing eyes of someone who dealt with complicated situations and had developed a finely calibrated sense of what was genuinely complicated versus what was merely irregular, reviewed the property acquisition from 3 angles and pronounced it clean. Tessa signed the deed on a Thursday in March. She sat in Pellegrini's office with the pen in her hand and the document on the table, and she looked at the address, the Marlowe's address, the building she'd spent 7 years in, plus the empty lot next door, and she felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Not triumph, not relief, something quieter, the specific, serious weight of something real. She signed it. She folded the copy, put it in her bag, and walked out into March air that was still cold, but had something different in it than February cold, a different quality. The suggestion of something that wasn't here yet, but was coming. She called her mother that night. Her mother, who had worked reception at a medical clinic for 28 years, and who had the particular combination of practicality and stubbornness that Tessa had apparently inherited in full, listened to the version Tessa told, which was not the whole version, which was the version that contained a restaurant and a deed, and a man whose name her mother would eventually have to hear, and was quiet for a moment. A restaurant, her mother said. Yes. Restaurant. Yes. Another pause. You've been wanting this since you were 22. I know. Why didn't you say so before? I didn't have the property before, Tessa said. Where'd you get the property? It's complicated. Her mother was quiet for 3 seconds. Is it the kind of complicated I need to worry about? No, Tessa said, and meant it. It's the kind of complicated that's already resolved. Her mother said, which was the sound she made when she was filing something to revisit later. You sound different, do I? Different good, her mother said. Not different bad. I know the difference. I know you do. When can I see it? The building? I'll call you when the construction starts, Tessa said. You can come see the lot first. She stopped. It's right where it should be, Mom. For me, it's exactly right. Her mother made the sound again. This time it had something warmer in it. Okay, her mother said. Call me when the construction starts. The construction started in April. She hired a contractor recommended by someone Ortega knew. The recommendation came with the specific credibility of a source she trusted, filtered through a source who had decided she was worth the trust, and she accepted it and verified it independently, because that was how she operated, and always had. She was involved in every decision. The layout, the kitchen design, the lighting warm, she'd told the contractor, not industrial. Warm the number of seats, the ratio of counter to table to booth. She knew exactly what she wanted, because she'd been thinking about it, in the abstract, since she was 22 years old, and new to Marlowe's and already seeing all the ways it could be better. She hired her first employee in May, a cook she'd known from Marlowe's, who'd been working a different overnight gig since Marlowe's closed and who said yes before she'd finished the sentence, which told her she'd asked the right person. She hired the second employee in June, the third and fourth in July. As the building started to take actual shape, not just a renovation but a new skin, the old bones of the place kept where they were solid and rebuilt where they weren't. She paid living wages. She built this into the budget from the first draft, not as an afterthought, not as something to revisit if things went well. Non-negotiable. The way the rules for Roman's visits to Marlowe's had been non-negotiable. This was how it worked, and everyone she hired understood that from the first conversation. She also built in overnight security. Paid for, professional, background checked. Because she knew what the overnight world was, and she wasn't going to ask her employees to navigate it without backup. She told Roman about the security plan on an evening in June when he came to look at the building's progress. He walked through the gutted interior with her, his arm out of the sling now, but still careful. The shoulder not at full strength. His gait adjusted slightly for the leg that was 90% of what it had been. He looked at everything she pointed at and listened to what she said about it and didn't offer opinions she hadn't asked for. She asked him about the security plan. He listened. He said, "The east-facing camera angle you're planning won't cover the alley." She looked at her notes. "You're right." She made a mark. "What angle does?" He told her. She wrote it down. "This is good," he said. And he didn't say it the way people said it to be encouraging. He said it the way he said everything as information. Assessment. Fact. "I know," she said. He looked at her. "I know it's good," she said. "I've known exactly what I was doing this whole time. I just needed the ground under me to do it on." Something moved across his face. The thing that moved across it sometimes that had no name she'd found yet, but that she'd stopped trying to name, because some things were true without requiring a word. "I want to show you something," he said. He walked her to the window that faced the street, the front of the building, where the sign would go. He stood beside her and looked out at the street, which was a regular city street, with regular city things happening on it. A bodega on the corner, a bus stop, the particular pedestrian mix of an urban block at 6 in the evening. "My father bought his first building when he was 26, Roman said. He bought it with money that came from things I don't need to tell you about. He stood in it the way I'm standing in this one. Thought it meant something." She waited. What it meant, Roman said, was the beginning of everything that almost killed both of us. He looked at the street. "I have 12 legitimate companies right now, managed by professionals. The operational structure," as he paused. "It's what I said I wanted it to be. It's moving in the direction I said." "I know," she said. "Carver keeps me informed." Roman looked at her. "Carver keeps you informed," he said. "He started sending me weekly summaries," she said. "About 3 months ago, I think he decided I was relevant to keep informed. And then she shrugged, kept doing it." Roman looked at the middle distance. "Carver sends weekly summaries to 6 people," he said. "He has sent them to the same 6 people for 9 years." "I know," she said. He mentioned that. Roman looked at her profile for a moment. Then he looked back at the window. "What I was going to say," he said, "is that my father stood in his first building and thought it was an ending, a completion, the thing he'd been building toward." He paused. "It wasn't. It was the beginning of everything that came after." He paused again. "I don't want this to be that for you." She looked at him. "I don't want you to stand in this building and think it's a conclusion," he said. I want you to stand in it and know it's just the ground. The solid thing. What you build on it from here? He stopped. She understood, reaching the edge of what he could say directly, and rather than push past it, he was going to stop, which was correct and which she appreciated. I know what I'm building, she said. Yes, he said. I know you do. They stood at the window for a while. Outside, the street did its regular business. A woman walked past with a stroller. Two men from the bus stop moved in opposite directions. The bodega on the corner had a display of cut flowers outside it, the orange and yellow kind, seasonal, nothing fancy. Roman, she said. Yeah. The first night you came back alone, she said. The night you made the offer. $500. Quiet stool. No questions. Yes. You said you trusted almost no one. She looked at the street. How many people do you trust now? He thought about it. She could feel him thinking about it. The real consideration, not a polite response. Brock, he said. Carver. Ortega. A pause. You. 4, she said. 4, he said. That's more than almost no one. Yes, he said. It is, she looked at him. Progress, she said. Something happened on his face. The almost law, but slower this time. Less compressed. More room in it. Progress, he agreed. Rowan's night kitchen opened on the 1st of September. She chose September because summer was over, and the particular seasonal exhaustion of a city's working people hit differently in September, the long bright days gone, the weight of the year accumulating, the need for somewhere warm and lit and steady, arriving at its sharpest right around the time the calendar turned. The night before opening, she was alone in the restaurant at 11 p.m., doing the last walkthrough. Lights up, kitchen clean, chairs and stools exactly where she decided they should be. The menu was on a chalkboard she'd put up herself, with writing she'd practiced 3 times before doing it for real. The sign above the door, Rowan's night kitchen, was lit in warm yellow-white, not neon, not the bleeding red of Marlowe's. Warm. She stood behind the counter and looked at the room. Her room. She thought about the version of herself that had stood behind a different counter 7 months ago and counted down the hours. The $412, the rent notices, the shoes that leaked in the snow. She wasn't that woman anymore. She wasn't trying to be, and she wasn't pretending she hadn't been. Both things were true. She had been that woman. She was not that woman now. And the distance between those 2 points was not luck, was not a man with money, was not even the specific, strange alchemy of what had happened in these 7 months. The distance was her stubbornness, her willingness to hold a coffee pot over an open wound and mean it, her ability to watch a room and know what it needed before it knew itself. She had always been capable of this ground. She just needed the ground. The bell above the door rang at 11:07 p.m. She looked up. Roman walked in. He was wearing a dark coat, no suit jacket underneath the version of casual that was as close as he got to casual, which was not very close, but was genuinely trying. His shoulder was fully healed now. She could tell because he'd stopped compensating. The subtle adjustment gone from the way he held himself. His face had some color back. The lines around his eyes were the same. Those weren't going anywhere, but they were less compressed than they'd been in February. Less load behind them. He looked at the room. She watched him look at it. The lights, the counter, the chalkboard, the chairs. The sign she could see him, reading through the front window, reflected backward from the inside. Rowan's night kitchen, in warm yellow-white. He looked at her. Coffee, she said. Black, he said. Please. The please excavated from its deep and underused place, exactly the same as the first night. She had not told him she remembered it. She didn't need to. She poured it. He sat on the stool at the end of the counter. Not the corner. Not the wall. Just the stool he'd been reaching for, she thought. Since the first night he'd come back alone and made his offer, and she'd told him she'd have her own rules. She set the mug in front of him. He wrapped his right hand around it. She poured her own tea. They sat in the particular quiet of 2 people who had been through something together and come out the other side, and who had found, in the aftermath, that they still wanted to be in the same room, that the crisis had not been the reason, that without the crisis the wanting remained. She looked at the room around them. In a few hours, the first employees would arrive. The first customers, the nurses, and the truck drivers, and the night shift workers, and the insomniacs, and the people between midnight and morning who needed somewhere to be, would start coming through the door. Her building. She had a staff she'd chosen and wages she'd set and an angle on the east side that covered the alley, because Roman had been right about that, and she'd made the adjustment. She had a man sitting on the stool at her counter who had, at some point in the last 7 months, stopped being a complexity and started being something much simpler, a person she wanted nearby. Not because she needed him, not out of gratitude or obligation or the particular distortion of feeling that crisis produces, but because when she imagined the room without him in it, the room was less than it should be. She wasn't going to say that tonight. Tonight was too full of other things. But she knew it, and knowing it was enough for now, Roman set his mug down. He reached into his coat. He put something on the counter, $500. 5 neat bills, folded once. She looked at them. She looked at him. He held her gaze with the particular quality of a man who is making a gesture that is simultaneously a callback and a statement and an apology and a declaration, and would never, in 1,000 years, say any of those things out loud. She picked up $498. She pushed it back across the counter. "Coffee is $2, she said. He looked at the $2 remaining in front of him. Something happened on his face that had been happening more often lately, the thing that was no longer just almost a smile. The thing that had arrived, gradually and then all at once, at the real article. Not performed, not managed. Just there, on the face of a man who had spent years keeping his face, as controlled as his environment, and who was slowly and imperfectly, and with the specific difficulty of a person unlearning a long habit, learning to let things show. $2, he said. Standard rate, she said. No exceptions. He left the $2 on the counter. Outside, the city was doing what it always did. Cold moving in from the north, the particular dark of a September midnight, the specific and ongoing indifference of a large thing to the small important things happening inside it. Inside Rowan's night kitchen, the lights were warm and steady. Tessa drank her tea. Roman drank his coffee. She had begun as a woman behind a counter at 3:14 in the morning, counting hours, holding a coffee pot over a bleeding man's arm, because she was too tired to be afraid and too stubborn to be managed. She had ended, or rather, she had arrived here, because she understood now that there was no ending to a person, only arrivals at new ground as the woman who owned the counter, who owned the building, who had watched a syndicate war from a surveillance screen and made decisions that shaped its outcome, and then sat in a room of dangerous men and held her ground until the ground held back, who had taken the thing that exhausted surviving, had built in her the ability to read a room, to see what was needed before it was asked for, to stay standing when everything reasonable suggested, sitting down, and turned it into something she hadn't had a name for 7 months ago, herself, fully, on ground she'd earned. The first customer came through the door at 12:11 a woman in scrubs, still wearing her hospital ID, who looked at the room with the expression of someone who had been hoping, without quite believing, that something like this would exist. Tessa set down her tea. "Sit anywhere," she said. "I'll bring you coffee." The woman sat. Tessa poured. The night began.